My Lords, second reading of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, Lord Whitehead.
My Lords, it is a great honour to address your Lordship's House for the first time, and particularly on a subject that has been close to my heart for as long as I can remember, namely the health and welfare of our planet and how we can protect and repair our oceans, which will be greatly enhanced by the bill, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, that I'm moving today. I would like to commence my remarks, however, by thanking all those who have welcomed me to your Lordship's House so warmly and have assisted with my introduction to it, to Garter King of Arms, to the clerks, to the House, to Black Rod, and to the esteemed, of course, doorkeepers of our House. And indeed to my marvellous supporters of my introduction, the noble Lord Bassam of Brighton and the noble Lady Baroness Blake of Leeds, both former council leaders in their cities, as I was for a number of years in Southampton, the city I've lived in all my adult life and which I had the honour to represent as one of its members of Parliament for some 27 years. Much of that time I have spent in Parliament promoting, advocating for and supporting action to fight climate change, particularly through the establishment of low-carbon energy, and I hope to be able to continue that advocacy in my time in this place. I've taken the title of Baron Whitehead of St Mary's in the city of Southampton as my thanks to the place that has nurtured me and given me all my life chances and to which I am hopelessly devoted. St Mary's is the parish in the centre of Southampton and remarkably contains two institutions of national and international repute: the St Mary's Stadium of Southampton Football Club and the National Oceanography Centre. The former is probably of national repute mainly in the minds of its supporters, one of which, alas, I am. But the latter really is a centre of international repute and has already played a huge role in monitoring and promoting the health and welfare of our oceans and will continue to play a key role in the UK's approach to the matter, following what I hope will be the adoption of the bill in front of us today. My Lords, this is a bill of ambition and global significance. It will, alongside associated secondary legislation, enable the United Kingdom to implement its obligations in the agreement under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ agreement, and to allow us to take the essential steps required for the UK's ratification. Now, this is a landmark agreement. It represents the culmination of nearly 2 decades of international negotiation and determined scientific advocacy. And it concerns nothing less than the future of the 2/3 of the world's oceans that lie beyond the jurisdiction of any single nation. These vast areas of ocean, remote, largely unexplored, but fundamental to life on Earth, regulate our climate, sustain fisheries, support communities, and host ecosystems of staggering complexity and beauty. Yet they are increasingly vulnerable. They're vulnerable to over-exploitation, to pollution, to the cumulative pressures of climate change. The BBNJ agreement is the world's collective answer to this challenge. The bill before us gives the United Kingdom the means to play its full part in that shared endeavour. My Lords, the United Kingdom was among the first countries to sign the BBNJ agreement when it opened for signature at the UN in 2023. We did so because we recognise that the 2/3 of the ocean in areas beyond national jurisdiction must be governed responsibly and transparently and with a shared sense of stewardship. This bill provides the domestic legislative framework to implement the three core pillars of the BBNJ agreement relating to marine genetic resources, area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, and environmental impact assessments. It also provides for regulation-making powers, allowing us to implement future decisions taken by the BBNJ Conference of the Parties, ensuring that the United Kingdom can remain at the forefront of global ocean governance in the years ahead. Now, the bill is divided into 5 parts, with parts 2, 3 and 4 aligning directly with the 3 substantive sections of the BBNJ agreement. My Lords, Part 2 introduces obligations around the collection, storage, use and reporting of marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction and of digital sequence information on those resources. UK researchers operating from UK craft, for example our Royal Research ships, will be required to notify a national focal point within the FCDO before and after collecting marine genetic resources, including digital sequence information on those resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Repositories and institutions holding marine genetic resources from areas beyond national jurisdiction will be required to provide access to samples under reasonable conditions. This will apply to bodies like the Natural History Museum, of course the National Oceanography Centre, and UK universities. Similarly, UK databases containing digital sequence information on such resources will need to ensure public access. Those who make use of such material, whether for academic research or commercial innovation, will be required to notify the national focal point once the results of their research are available, including when those results take the form of published papers or granted patents. The FCDO will send these notifications to the BBNJ clearinghouse mechanism, an open access platform enabling parties to the agreement to understand what is being collected, where and how it is being utilised. This transparency is the foundation of the BBNJ's agreement benefit sharing regime. It also ensures that researchers in developing states have access to the same scientific information as their counterparts in developed economies. My Lords, marine genetic resources may be the source of tomorrow's medicines. It may be the source of new sustainable materials, of novel enzymes and breakthroughs we cannot yet imagine. And the UK is proud to be home to world-leading institutions such as the Natural History Museum, and here it is again, the National Oceanography Centre, and our many outstanding universities. The bill ensures that they can continue to operate at the cutting edge of marine science while contributing to a fair and inclusive global framework. And Part 3 of the bill gives the UK the necessary powers to implement internationally agreed measures relating to marine protected areas and other area-based management tools established under the BBNJ agreement. And these measures will be agreed at future meetings of the BBNJ Conference of the Parties and may include restrictions or management measures that apply to activities taking place in areas beyond national jurisdiction. This part also enables the UK to implement emergency measures, for example, in response to a sudden environmental disaster requiring urgent international action. In essence, Part 3 ensures that when the international community collectively agrees to take measures to protect a vulnerable ecosystem in areas beyond national jurisdiction, the United Kingdom has the means to act accordingly. Turning to Part 4 of the bill updates the UK's domestic marine licensing regime to incorporate the environmental impact assessment requirements of the agreement. This applies to licensable marine activities taking place in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The bill grants powers to update domestic legislation as new standards and guidelines are developed by the Conference to the Parties. The ocean economy is evolving rapidly. New technologies, new industries, and new pressures. This part ensures that the UK's regulatory framework remains modern, agile, and aligned with international best practice. My Lords, put simply, these measures future-proof our environmental assessment process for activities on the high seas. Now, in addition to this primary legislation, a small number of statutory instruments will be required before the United Kingdom can complete its ratification. These relate in particular to environmental impact assessments and the definition of digital sequence information, and will be laid after royal assent. Once that secondary legislation is in place, the UK will be in a position to deposit its instrument of ratification with the United Nations. As noble lords may know, the BBNJ agreement will enter into force on the 17th of January 2026, having now reached the crucial threshold of 60 ratifications. The inaugural conference of the parties is expected later that year. Now, importantly, the UK can only attend that conference as a state party if we have ratified at least 30 days beforehand. That is why, my Lords, timely passage of this bill is of genuine importance. My Lords, this bill may appear narrowly scoped and targeted, but its implications are profound. It supports the United Kingdom's commitment to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. It reinforces our belief in multilateralism and the rules-based international system at a time when both face increasing strain. And it allows us to address global challenges, climate change, biodiversity loss, and food security, not in isolation, but in partnership with allies and developing states alike. The UK's leadership in the early BBNJ negotiations was informed by the extraordinary expertise of our marine scientists, our legal scholars, and environmental advocates. Many of them have waited a long time for this moment, and their passion and persistence have been instrumental in bringing this agreement to fruition. Now, allow me, my Lords, to recognise the considerable contributions made by noble lords from across the Chamber, by civil society organisations, and by our research community, all of whom have shaped the UK's approach to the BBNJ agreement. And in the spirit of cross-party relations, I would also like to pay tribute to the ministers in the last government, in particular the noble Lady Baroness Coffey and the noble Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, who were part of the team who signed the treaty on behalf of the UK government in 2023. And I would also like to thank my noble friend, the Minister for International Development, for the opportunity to open the debate today. So, my Lords, to conclude, the health of our oceans is inseparable from the health of our planet. And although we may not often see these ecosystems with our own eyes, the responsibility to protect them falls on all of us. The BBNJ bill is our opportunity to rise to that responsibility to safeguard fragile ecosystems, to support sustainable development, and to ensure that the benefits of ocean science are shared fairly and responsibly. The United Kingdom has always played a leading role in advancing global ocean governance. With this bill, we have the chance to continue that leadership. The ocean cannot wait, and nor should we. My Lords, I beg to move that the bill be read a second time.
Yeah. The question is that this bill be now read a second time.
I rise to speak first after the Minister's opening speech from the government benches, and it is my honour today to welcome my noble friend, Lord Whitehead of St Mary's, to the dispatch box and congratulate him on his brilliant maiden speech. I pay tribute to him, joining the esteemed ranks of those who have made their maiden speech from the dispatch box. He has had a distinguished career. From being leader of Southampton City Council, he championed innovative energy projects and was the first MP to have solar panels and I even believe a wind turbine installed on his constituency home roof. His private member's bill on climate change may well have been talked out in his early days, but much of it made it and was incorporated into Labour's world-leading Climate Change Act 2008. Climate change that affects so much of the planet's precious biodiversity, especially in the marine environment, the subject of today's bill. His constituency has within it St Mary's Stadium, once home of Southampton FC, where my noble friend is a prominent member of the Saints Trust. Southampton is one of 3 furthest stadiums to visit from Everton FC, but I well remember happy visits, especially when Dave Jones, a dependable right back that used to play for us, was Southampton manager. Southampton was the last team to visit Goodison Park last season, and I look forward to welcoming that team and his support at our new Everton Stadium as soon as they can soon resume their rightful place in the Premier League. While in the Commons, my noble friend was number 1 in the parliamentary football team, that being the position of goalkeeper, and was part of the famous team to play in the Portuguese Parliament in 2006 as part of the 2006 FIFA World Cup curtain raiser. I didn't meet my noble friend on the football pitch, but in the front bench on statutory instruments committees, he from the Commons, myself from the Lords, on many energy orders, where, to change sporting analogies, I like to call us the tag team partners on energy matters. I'm very glad to welcome him to your Lordship's house and look forward to his many innovative approaches on energy, not least on fuel poverty matters, where there is now the opportunity to utilise DCC's smart meter network to improve identification and tailored intervention for fuel-poor households, increasing the use of timely, accurate and cost-effective interventions such as direct-to-the-meter credit and the development of a social tariff. I'll be looking forward to his many further contributions to our debates and leadership of energy policy developments. My Lords, there could be no better bill in which to make your maiden speech than today's second reading of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions Bill, one which, like the Climate Change Act, will be universally acclaimed and world-leading in supporting one of the greatest challenges in protecting the high seas outside national jurisdictions. These areas of no recognised national authority cover half the surface of the planet, are already threatened, not least from claims in the Arctic for valuable minerals and in other areas from overfishing, pollution from abandoned fishing nets, plastics and the impacts of climate warming sea temperatures. 90% of heat from greenhouse gas emissions are absorbed by the oceans. 30% of CO2 emissions are absorbed by the oceans. 90% of global trade is transported through these oceans, yet only 1.2% of the oceans are currently protected. Species such as whales have constantly been under attack, and the threat of ever deeper sea mining and excavations only increases. It is imperative that the UN, through its Convention on the Law of the Seas, has provided this framework for international maritime law and defines the high seas as international waters where all nations may fish, navigate and conduct research under shared principles. From the UK's accession to the Convention in 1997, the UN General Assembly has developed focus on the sustained use of marine biodiversity in those areas, including the oceans and the seabed. The 2022 COP15 Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework established targets and culminated in 2023 a formal adoption of binding agreements established and developed by consensus. This framework established the 30 by 30 biodiversity targets, 30% of conservation and protection of sites by 2030, to which the UK is committed. This BBNJ bill is drawn up to align UK law with this international agreement and consensus on biodiversity. I welcome the bill. It sets out the requirements for UK-based activity and affiliated projects, vessels and equipment processes, collecting and researching marine resources from international waters. It includes advance notification, post-activity reporting and public access to reports and information. Aside from 2 clauses relating specifically to Scottish law and ministers, the bill would apply to the whole of the UK and could be extended to any British overseas territories by orders in Council. This is very promising. It establishes a system of support to undertake cooperative arrangements among projects, teams, countries and alliances through capacity building and technology sharing. It also establishes an ability to create emergency protected areas in any disaster scenario. It has, as an example, the workings of the Antarctic Treaty System, which already operates as a framework for international management of the Antarctic for conservation. The other place has welcomed the bill. The government has already adopted the 30 by 30 approach as it refers to the domestic national jurisdictions on land and sea up to 200 nautical miles off the shore, and established a network of 297 marine protected areas covering some 210,000 kilometres, representing 23% of the UK's domestic waters. Here I declare my interest as serving on your Lordship's Environment and Climate Change Committee that reported on 30 by 30 in July 2023. This report found that even in the domestic front, there is a long way to go beyond declarations and drawing areas on a map. On land, what sites will count towards 30 by 30 when only perhaps less than 10% of England is covered by designations such as triple SIs, special areas of conservation, special protected areas and rampart sites. The report found a widespread lack of clarity about the level of nature conservation and protection. There is a poor level of monitoring data which limits understanding of current conditions. On land, only 22% of triple SA sites have been monitored in the last 6 years. On UK waters, the position is even more precarious and unknown, where MPAs are still at the rudimentary stage. From this domestic background, the challenge of the high seas seems daunting. Can the noble lady, my noble friend, the Minister, in her replies confirm that at least the signatories to the BBNJ agreement are approaching the situation with the precautionary principle in mind? Can she give any indication how conservations about the treaty and how it will work in practice are developing? The practicalities of taking the work forward from this bill would seem extremely daunting from the approaches towards the latest COP in Brazil from the Trump administration and others towards climate change in general and deep sea mining in particular. Will the government develop a strategy behind the bill regarding how it will undertake its approach, how it will develop a baseline of data on the UK's MPAs into consistency with data on international waters, how it will develop monitoring plans around the world, how it will encourage cooperation and support from the overseas territories. All this presents a costly challenge when budgets may find it difficult to maintain the required level of expenditure. While welcoming the aspirations and imperatives of this bill, I'd like to encourage my noble friend to define the practicalities of how the UK can set priorities and develop expertise of approach to achieve best outcomes. In this, I would like to welcome confirmation of extensive public engagement that could be undertaken to encourage the proper accountabilities and reports that this bill is being taken seriously alongside climate change. The UK government can be encouraged to take up this challenge from this endorsement on the shared stewardship of the planet into the future with the world-leading oceanography site in Southampton.
Yeah. My Lords, it's a great pleasure to open for the official opposition on this important bill. Before I speak to the bill, I'd like to welcome the noble Lord, Lord Whitehead, to his place on the front bench and congratulate him on his excellent maiden speech. He served for many years in the other place, and I know he will bring that wealth of experience to his new role in your Lordship's House. My Lords, our oceans are home to over 260,000 different species, and their health is essential to the health of our planet. Unlike biodiversity within our borders, every nation has a responsibility to protect the high seas. 2/3 of the world's oceans lie beyond the jurisdiction of any single nation. They are wonderfully biodiverse, but we know they are threatened by a whole host of harms, the most challenging of which includes overfishing, man-made pollution, and the impact of climate change. It is the duty of all of us to take the responsible action needed to safeguard marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. My Lords, for many years, Britain has led the way on protecting our oceans. In our domestic waters, we have established a network of 296 marine protection areas, protecting over 200,000 square kilometres of sea. Even more significantly, we established the Blue Belt programme, supporting our UK overseas territories to assist them in creating and maintaining healthy and productive marine ecosystems. My Lords, that programme shows how committed we are to tackling the serious global problems of overfishing, species extinction and climate change. As noble Lords will be aware, the UK overseas territories are estimated to be home to up to 90% of known endemic UK biodiversity, hosting a huge range of unique and endangered species. Consequently, we have a unique responsibility to protect that biodiversity. Through the Blue Belt programme, the UK and our overseas territories have created over 4.4 million square kilometres of marine protected areas, from the South Atlantic and the Pacific to the Indian Ocean. Can the noble Baroness the Minister provide an update on work the United Kingdom Government is doing with our overseas territories to continue that excellent programme as part of the Government's manifesto commitment to our overseas territories? During the debates in the other place, serious concerns were raised about the impact of the UK-Mauritius agreement concerning the Chagos archipelago, including Diego Garcia, on the protection of marine biodiversity around the Chagos archipelago. I know the noble Baroness the Minister may feel this issue is not directly concerned with the bill, but we will be seeking to explore the impact of that agreement on marine biodiversity during the debates on this bill. It is only right that noble Lords on this side of the House should be given the opportunity to probe the issue of marine biodiversity in the area around the archipelago at committee stage. Turning back to the bill itself, we are firmly supportive of the Government's ambition to boost protections for our global marine diversity. We signed the treaty in 2023, as mentioned by the noble Lord the Minister, under the previous government, and we are unwavering in our commitment to biodiversity. That said, as a reasonable opposition, we will scrutinise the bill in detail to ensure Parliament has had the opportunity to hear how ministers intend to use the wide-ranging regulations making powers contained in the bill. We will also seek to understand more fully how the Government expects our involvement in the BBNJ's Conference of the Parties to be managed. My Lords, we're also interested to know where the first marine protected areas under the agreement will be located. I wonder if the noble Baroness the Minister can give us an update on that matter. On the Conference of the Parties, the agreement has now been ratified by 60 signatories, which means it will come into force in 2026. Once this bill is passed, does the Government have a target date for ratification so we can play a full role from the moment the treaty comes into effect? As many noble Lords will know, our UK fishing industry is struggling. The Government have already capitulated on EU access to our fishing waters. So what impact does the Government expect the new marine protected areas to have on our domestic fishing fleet, and what steps will be taken to monitor this over time. My Lords, we are clear that the United Kingdom must uphold its obligations under this landmark treaty, but we must also keep our own domestic interests in mind at all times. Where MPAs do include prohibitions on fishing, what representations will the fishing industry in both the UK and other affected nations be able to make to the Conference of the Parties so the full impact of those prohibitions can be considered before an MPA is implemented? My Lords, we will also seek to probe the UK's rights should we wish to leave the treaty. We do not expect to find ourselves in that position, but it is only right that we consider how we could practically manage an exit from the treaty should a future government decide it's expedient for us to do so. What thoughts have ministers given to that? And can the noble Baroness the Minister outline her expectations of how that process might be managed should the situation arise? In conclusion, my Lords, we are firmly supportive of this bill's intentions. The government is right to press ahead with legislation that will allow the treaty to be ratified, and we are proud to have made the UK a signatory of this landmark treaty when we are in government. Marine biodiversity matters, and it is right that we should play our part in protecting it. But that does not mean that we should step back from our duty to do the work of a revising chamber, to scrutinise the bill in detail and propose improvements where necessary. We will do that work thoroughly and carefully to ensure that this is the best bill it can be when it goes on to become law. I look forward to the response to the noble Baroness the Minister.
My Lord, I join others in welcoming the noble Lord Whitehead, to the front bench and congratulating him on his excellent maiden speech. And I was particularly glad that he gave several marketing plugs for the National Oceanography Centre, which I was responsible for setting up when I was the Chief Executive of the Natural Environment Research Council. I'd also like to thank the noble Baroness Chapman of Darlington for her helpful briefing session on the bill last week. My Lords, I fully support the Government's intention to ratify the High Seas Treaty by mid-January 2026, and I can see no good reason for preventing this. As the legal advisor to the Alliance of Small Island States said, before the treaty, the high seas were known as the Wild, Wild Wet. They are a classic example of the tragedy of the commons. Against this background, I'd like to ask the noble Baroness the Minister 3 questions. First, what are we talking about when we refer to marine biodiversity? Second, what are the main threats to marine biodiversity? Third, how will the treaty be enforced? My Lords, the treaty aims to protect marine biodiversity in the high seas outside economic exclusion zones. But, my Lords, no one knows how many species there are in the oceans. According to the World Register of Marine Species, there are about 250,000 known marine species, and new species are being discovered at the rate of nearly 2,500 a year. Most of these new species are microscopic benthic crustaceans, mollusks, and annelids. It's estimated there are probably between 1 and 2 million species still to be discovered. In other words, about 90% of marine biodiversity is unknown. And if we include bacteria and other microorganisms, the number remaining to be discovered will be much greater. In short, we don't know what it is that this treaty aims to protect. My Lords, I would therefore like to ask the noble Baroness the Minister whether she can assure us that the government will support research efforts in our universities, museums and research institutes to fully document marine biodiversity so that we have a better idea of what it is we are protecting. My Lords, my second question concerns the threats to marine biodiversity. There's widespread agreement that human activity is causing the extinction of many species both in the oceans and on land. The Marine Conservation Society lists overfishing, bycatch, climate change, pollution, and other human activities such as deep-sea mining among the major causes of loss of marine species. Nearly 38% of the world's stocks are overfished, and an estimated 9 million tonnes a year of fish and other marine organisms are thrown away dead as bycatch. According to the latest figures from DEFRA, 54% of the fish stocks in UK waters are currently overfished. Can the Noble Baroness the Minister therefore assure us that the government will press for sustainable management of fisheries in the high seas and reductions in bycatch, and at the same time set a leadership example by managing our own fish stock sustainably? Can she also tell us whether deep-sea marine mining will be included in the treaty? Flora and Fauna International point out that the hotspots for marine biodiversity are often associated with deposits of rare minerals such as cobalt and manganese. These hotspots include the hydrothermal vents where tectonic plates meet and are home to extraordinary creatures able to survive in near boiling water full of highly toxic chemicals. My Lords, I now turn to my third question, enforcement. The Marine Biological Association says, and I quote, "If we have learned anything about marine protected areas within national jurisdiction, designating marine protected areas does not mean effective protection." As I understand it, my Lords, the current regime for enforcement of the law of the sea is based on flag state responsibility. Countries are expected to create offences under national laws and prosecute if there is a violation. The difficulty is that under this regime, vessels can opt for flags with countries that have poor regulation and poor records of prosecution. Could the Noble Baroness the Minister therefore tell us how the government envisages that the treaty will be effectively enforced?
My Lords, I stand to speak in favour of the bill before your Lordship's House at second reading, but first may I congratulate the Noble Lord Whitehead on his maiden speech. And my first recollection really of Southampton was visiting the Royal Research Ship Bransfield before it departed for the Antarctic, and as a 10-year-old that was such an exciting visit to go and explore that ship before it travelled to some of the most harshest high seas that we know on the planet. The world's oceans support biodiversity, regulate climate, store carbon, sustain global food webs and provide critical genetic and biological resources. Protecting them is vital not only for ocean health but for the stability and the well-being of the entire planet. Thus, I thank the Noble Lord, the Minister, for bringing this bill, together with the Noble Baroness, the Minister, and seeking for its speedy but well-scrutinised passage so that the UK can have a seat at the first conference of the parties of the UN BBNJ. May I start my observations with some medieval manuscripts. Many of the cathedral libraries of this nation contain wonderful collections, and over the years I've been struck by the amount of graffiti in the margins of such documents, doodles by monks and scholars down through the centuries, which quite frequently are little drawings of scary sea monsters. The leviathans jump out at you as you turn the vellum. These sea monsters and the mysteries of the recesses of the deep captured the imagination of our forebears. The flood and Noah, the parting of the Red Sea, the exploits of Jonah in the belly of the whale, the trials of Job when he is asked, "Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep?" The sea journeys of St. Paul with his dramatic shipwreck and the book of Revelation's glassy sea have all been analysed and interpreted, yes, and doodled, my lords. Long has been the respect for the sea, for the oceans, this place of chaos beyond our taming, this place of mystery with depths beyond human reach, with the glimpses of its wonders reported back by adventurous travellers. Indeed, 32 of the 150 psalms refer to the sea. For example, the psalmist speaks of how some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the mighty waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. My lords, those wondrous works in the deep are under threat. We have lost a respectfulness for the high seas in favour of an exploitative attitude. Deep sea mining, overfishing, pollution, ocean acidification, oil and gas extraction are all threats that are faced. Our oceans provide diverse ecosystems, including hydrothermic vents and cold seeps, with many endemic species within a small area. Our oceans act as the largest carbon sinks on the planet, storing carbon in deep sea sediments, reducing atmospheric CO2 and slowing global warming. Our oceans are nursery grounds for commercially important species and play an important role in the life cycle of many others, including creatures great and small, known and yet unknown, as the noble Lord Krebs has outlined. Our oceans recycle nutrients that eventually resurface and support marine food webs. Our oceans are genetic and biological resources, reserves of such resources, including those species with such unique adaptations that they can live in extreme pressure, in darkness, in toxic chemical environments, all of which are valuable potentially in biotechnology, medicine and industry. And the list goes on, my lords. In ratifying the BBNJ agreement, we do need, though, to ensure that our own waters, and particularly the biodiversity of our marine protected areas, are conserved and well managed. That is why I urge His Majesty's Government to publish its response to the consultation on bottom trawling in marine protected areas. I would also ask the noble Baroness the Minister to update your lordships on progress towards a complete ban of this seabed damaging activity in these areas, as advised by the Environmental Audit Committee. My lords, protecting our oceans is vital not only for ocean health, but for the stability of the entire planet and the flourishing of humanity. That's why the government is right to bring forward the ratification of the High Seas Treaty, and I fully support them.
My lords, the adoption of the High Seas Treaty in 2023 marked one of the most significant achievements in international environmental governance in decades. And the treaty fills a crucial gap in ocean regulation by establishing this comprehensive framework to conserve and sustainably use marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. That area actually makes up nearly 2/3 of the world's ocean. And I'm proud that the United Kingdom played a decisive role in securing this agreement, with the UK government helping to push the negotiations towards successful conclusion. I'm grateful to the Minister for giving me some credit and that of my noble friend Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, but I think also it's worth crediting my noble friends Lord Goldsmith and Lord Benyon on their role in the negotiations, even if I did mostly play a part in myself, but also that of Boris Johnson, who really drove a lot of this environmental work in the last government. Now, my lords, it's also a huge pleasure. I regret actually the 5-minute advisory speech. It seems to be a habit nowadays of the government to try and curtail when so few people have put in to speak on this very important bill. But nevertheless, what I don't regret is actually seeing the new minister, the noble Lord Whitehead, in his place. A member of Parliament for over 25 years, a shadow energy minister for over 9 years. It is great to see him finally, and not for the first time being minister, but to be an energy minister in this administration. And I do know from the work I enjoyed with him when I was in the Commons as well, is how thoughtful and considerate and how competent this new minister truly is. And I look forward to working with him on many other issues affecting our planet. In terms of one of the aspects that I think is important to consider, while I'm conscious here the Minister mentioned about timely passage being important, I won't be churlish by saying, well, it's taken over a year to get the bill to this stage. However, one of the things that I will want to ask the Minister, the noble Baroness, why it is in this bill that we've got a situation where we have to do further regulations to bring this into effect. While I had hoped that we would not need any amendments, I suppose I'm giving due warning that I will be tabling an amendment to try and remove that, because from my perspective it seems entirely redundant, especially when we know that the treaty in effect will come into force not just next year, next month, as more than 60 countries have already ratified. So I think it's important that, having been at the leading edge of making sure that we got this treaty with many negotiations that were frankly pretty tough at times, but it's important that we continue to make sure we have a seat at the table when the COP first resumes. Indeed, one of the things that's been important in getting to this point has been demonstrating by our domestic leadership what we were able to do without threatening our economy, but indeed being fully mindful that whereas the ocean has given so much to us, we haven't recognised that until recently. And it's absolutely vital, recognising that a lot of, how can I put it, we have taken advantage of the ocean more or less for free. We now need to repay that and actually give the ocean a rest, but also critically the importance of biodiversity in our oceans. Now that's going to be taking quite a lot of the relationships that we've developed over many years, but one of the questions I wanted to also ask the Minister was, as my noble friend Earl Cortown referred to, the Blue Belt has been one of the most important elements of UK government policy, working with overseas territories in trying to enhance biodiversity in our oceans. But I've noticed in this particular bill only no specific overseas territory is currently included. And I'm conscious that while an order in council can make that happen, one of the things in the UK Overseas Territories Biodiversity Strategy, which was published within the last week, only one overseas territory made any reference to BBNJ, and that was Bermuda, in thinking and particularly referencing the Sargasso Sea. So I'm very keen to understand what discussions the Minister has had with overseas territories in regard to this, because candidly, if we cannot get the overseas territories fully engaged, and by the way, that may mean us coughing up some cash. I'm not adverse to that. We certainly did plenty of that, never mind through the Blue Belt Fund, but also through a variety of other mechanisms, as my noble friend also referred to earlier regarding the Commonwealth Charter. It is vital that we have them fully engaged in something which is so precious to our planet going forward. In terms of thinking through some of the other aspects of the bill, I'm not going to digress actually into other issues which the Noble Lord Krebs has referred to, like deep sea mining and the like, because I appreciate that isn't the role of this specific treaty, and certainly in this bill we're referring to elements of the legislation to which need to be adapted. But I did want to clarify in Clause 8 why this does not apply to the Antarctic. I'm conscious that there is already an Antarctic Act, already a treaty, but CCAMLR is, I appreciate, it's quite, how can I put it, precarious? Not precarious, that's not the right word. Conscious that it can be quite challenging considering the role of the Antarctic, but I would have thought this area of the world would actually lend itself massively to having a BBNJ kind of a MPA designation. In terms of other aspects of BBNJ,
the Noble Baroness comment earlier about the speaking advisory time, but I'd be grateful if she could bring things to a close.
Grateful for the advice, but I will carry on with a few things on this. In terms of, because we get criticised, I think Noble Lords say in committee, for doing second reading speeches when we're trying to understand the passage of the bill at this key point. So in terms of one of the other aspects, it's already been mentioned, where could it be? It had widely been expected the first BBNJ would be waters between Galapagos Islands and Ecuador, but I think there's a golden opportunity to consider between Tristan da Cunha and a Commonwealth country, Namibia. I'm conscious of what the whip has just said, but I do think we need to explore why some of the other clauses are in here. I look at other parts of Clause 25. I wonder if the Minister could explain subsection 3 of Clause 25. Indeed, we've got the classic 25 subsection 2. It seems to be the classic, in case we've forgotten something, we'll shove this in here, part of the bill. I wouldn't like to think that's what we need to do with this treaty. But for that, and I'm sure that we will explore, sadly, at committee stage, because I had hoped we wouldn't need amendments. I do want this bill to go through as quickly as possible, but I think we need to remove some of the barriers that are currently in the way, making sure that we can part of the first COP in 2026.
My Lords, I too welcome the Noble Lord Whitehead of St Mary to his seat in your Lordship's house and also to the dispatch box. And it was wonderful to hear such a green-minded speech, which over the past few years has become more common here, but is still very welcome. I particularly liked his commenting on protect and repair our ocean, our high seas. I think that's absolutely crucial, that we have to understand how much damage we've done already, and that we do have to try our best to recover it if we can. Now, the UK was one of the first countries to sign up to the UN Agreement on the Law of the Sea, and we have been active in shaping the treaty, so it makes sense to pass this bill as soon as possible. I want to flag up some reasons why this agreement is a good idea, but also what protections ministers should be seeking next. Now, the good things are, it's good for UK science. Our very own National Oceanography Centre is one of the world leaders in ocean scientific research, and this bill will ensure that marine science and technology can develop to further understand and meet the demands of a changing climate. It's good for marine life and ecosystems. Our oceans are full of beautiful things, and protecting our oceans ensures that beauty survives. We are far too careless about such a very precious complex of ecosystems that we barely know anything about. It's also good for UK food security. A thriving sea is full of life, and some of that life can help to sustain our lives and our economy. We must regulate and manage the competition for the marine genetic resources, which can be used to support development of new drugs, cosmetics, food and industrial processes. But currently, our oceans are collapsing under the strains of plastic pollution, bottom trawling, massive mining projects, toxic dumping and climate change. And it's this combined assault on ecosystems that will collapse life in the seas. And these problems make international treaties crucial and urgent. The scale of this agreement is huge. It will help to protect 2/3 of the world's ocean. It has the kind of vision that will help us deal with the rapidly developing impacts of climate change. However, as is usual with this government and the last, ministers are trying to grab additional powers via secondary legislation. It would make sense to increase parliamentary scrutiny of secondary powers. Good policy requires accountability. And we need to ensure that our government is listening to a range of experts, not just those people with loads of cash who can use money and personal contacts to gain access to the detailed discussions. So my biggest concerns are monitoring and enforcement. I simply don't understand how those two things will happen in any sort of efficient way. I would like us to become a world leader in pushing for the establishment of marine protected areas in places beyond national jurisdiction. We should be aiming to protect 30% of the world's marine areas by 2030, but I do mean protect. For example, Greenpeace has found that 90% of our own marine protected areas aren't really protected at all. There's no meaningful site-wide regulation on the most destructive fishing activity. Greenpeace says of our MPA protection, this is rhetoric over reality. And I think this treaty could be the same. Being a world leader means enforcing the strictest regulation of the existing marine protection areas in UK territorial waters, with an end to bottom trawling and devastating mining operations. And I do hope the Noble Lord the Minister will help us to do that in a timely, well, in a very fast way. So far, the Trump administration has not ratified the treaty and has actually pursued issuing deep ocean mining licenses unilaterally, ignoring the UN-backed International Seabed Authority. And the demand for mining materials is rising when we barely know anything about our deep seabed. We must also end the public subsidy of pollution within free ports, as we saw up in Teesside when the dredging of industrial chemicals that had been buried for decades allegedly led to the mass deaths of crabs and lobsters along the northeast coast of England. More deregulation of free ports will mean more environmental problems and more taxpayer money spent on cleaning up the mess at a future date. So while I'm sure most here would like this bill to pass so that we can sign up to the international law 30 days before the ratification, I would say it does not go far enough to protect our ocean. Can the Noble Lady the Minister tell me how strongly this government will live up to the rhetoric?
My Lords, can I declare my environmental interests in the register and join with other Noble Lords in welcoming the Noble Lord Whitehead to our House and an environmentalist to the FCDO. Wonderful, wonderful. Can I also welcome this bill? It'll, as many noble lords have said, help protect 2/3 of the world's oceans, but it also will be a big UK contribution to supporting the 30 by 30 commitment made as part of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And I hope it will also be a positive statement about the UK's leadership contribution on climate and biodiversity, though it would have been more convincing perhaps if we'd shown similar leadership on future forests at the recent climate COP at Belém. But while thanking, I think I've just thanked the government, can I do an Oliver Twist act and ask for more? I've got 5 minutes and I've got 5 asks. As the Minister and other noble lords have already stressed, can we keep the pressure up to get this bill and the secondary legislation through so that we can ensure a place at the first conference of the parties next year? Secondly, can my noble friend the Minister ensure that UK actions at home and abroad reflect the values of the treaty? 2 examples where we should be showing an example to demonstrate our commitment to the values. One has already been mentioned, which is progress so far in ending bottom trawling in all our marine protected areas here in the UK. What is being proposed at the moment is inadequate and we need to do better than that. Can my noble friend the Minister also tell the House what further progress has been made in ensuring that under the Chagos deal, which is a cause close to my heart because it has the largest and one of the most wonderful and important marine protected areas involved, can the Minister tell the House what further progress has been made around this deal to make sure that the MPA around the Chagos archipelago is properly safeguarded with the transfer to Mauritius? My third ask is, can the Minister reaffirm the UK's position on the moratorium of deep sea mining and licensing that's already been referenced now that President Trump is going ahead and ignoring the International Seabed Authority? My fourth is, can the Minister urge her DEFRA colleagues to produce a strategy for overfishing beyond 2026 at the end of the current commitments for the UK? The Fisheries Act simply isn't working. Quotas are not based on evidence, and I was convinced that the noble Lord Krebs was going, who's not in his place, was going to mount a sturdy evidence-based statement about that, but he didn't, damn him, and I hadn't done the research in order to back that up, but he would have if he had thought about it. 27% of commercial fish stocks are critically low, and a further 25% on top of that are suffering from over-exploitation. More than half of UK fishing opportunities are being allocated in excess of scientific advice, which the noble Lord Krebs would have spoken about, and that's leading to heavy declines, but not only in key stocks, but undermining the sustainability of fishing livelihoods. It's impossible to deliver economic growth within fishing if we continue to deplete the asset on which the sector depends. And the combination of declining stocks and increasing concentration of quota in the hands of a very few, mostly foreign-owned vessels, means that the inshore fleet is now on its knees. This is causing job losses and hardship in coastal towns that are very important electorally, may I say, to my party. So will the government commit to a full review of the Fisheries Act? My last call is of course, one that's been already referred to, and that's, last but not least, 145 countries have signed the Global Ocean Treaty. 73 have now formally ratified. Can my noble friend the Minister update the House on what steps the government is taking to persuade those nations who haven't yet formally ratified to do so?
My Lords, I should begin by congratulating the noble Lord the Minister, Lord Whitehead, on his opening speech, his maiden speech, opening his scoring in this House, and may his subsequent contributions be as good as this one. It'll be a fine record. But the bill to which we're giving a second reading today, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions Bill, has a complex and difficult to understand title and an equally complex content, but it is nevertheless, I would argue, a necessary and a desirable major step towards implementing some of the obligations the UK assumed when it signed 2 other important international treaties, the Law of the Sea Convention, known as UNCLOS, and the Biodiversity Convention, both of which we signed more than 30 years ago and which we subsequently ratified. I should perhaps admit that I was Britain's permanent representative to the United Nations when the negotiations of those two founding treaties were concluded, and both were concluded under a Conservative government whose Prime Minister was John Major, who picked up the baton first held by the late Noble Lady Baroness Thatcher, who came to realise that collective global action was a necessity if the challenges of global warming and loss of biodiversity were to be reversed or at least mitigated. So I would suggest at the outset that this implementing measure deserves to be treated on a non-party basis. Whether it will be so is for others to decide. The urgency of the legislation we are discussing has been spoken to by several noble lords. It is to enable the UK to participate from the outset in the governance procedures of this convention, protecting the biodiversity of those sea areas which fall outside national jurisdictions, what's often known as the open seas. But those seas are open to abuse, amounting to plunder and thus requiring protection. And Britain's record justifies and requires its presence on these governance procedures, which, whatever we decide, will enter into force at the beginning of 2026. The historical record of those who fish in and otherwise exploit the resources of these waters is not, let us face it, a good one. Modern technology has facilitated overfishing of stocks, some of them to extinction, and the enlargement of the areas where exploitation can take place is an inevitable result of global warming, particularly in the Arctic, making the problem more extensive and the need for protective regulation, such as this convention provides the basis for, more urgent. That regulation cannot be successfully achieved on a national rather than an international basis, as the provisions of this bill eloquently demonstrate. We often hear in this House about the need to defend the rules-based international order. That catch-all phrase probably confuses as much as it persuades. But there can be little doubt that that order is under serious threat on issues relating to international peace and security, on world trading rules, and on the environment. Here is an opportunity not just to circle the wagons around existing rules, but to extend their scope, which it is in general terms the government's policy and that of the official opposition. We need to take it up. This debate would not be complete without a reference to one notable and substantial absentee, the United States of America. The US Congress has declined to ratify the Law of the Sea Convention, UNCLOS, despite its provisions being so valuable to their strategic interests, for example in the South China Sea, that the US actually recognizes UNCLOS as customary international law. It declined to sign the Biodiversity Convention in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and ever since it has sustained that refusal on the erroneous grounds that it would damage the US's biotechnology industries, when the main failing of the Biodiversity Convention is that it is too weak and not that it is too strong. America, of course, will decide for itself what is in its interest. But I do hope that the noble Lord Lady the Minister will confirm, when she winds up this debate, that we will continue to urge the US to join these conventions, and that we will continue to hold the door open for them should they have a change of heart.
My Lords, let me begin by congratulating Lord Whitehead on joining this House. He and I worked together in the 1997 Labour government when he was an enormous support to me, and I know he will make a huge contribution to the House. I was a member of the International Relations and Defence Select Committee when it wrote a report in 1922 on UNCLOS, the law of the sea in the 21st century. Underlying its recommendations was the committee's view that as a major maritime power, the UK has a strong role to play in the development and maintenance of the law of the sea. As such, it must meet 21st century challenges to ensure usefulness and relevance of UNCLOS. Many of its recommendations related to issues which are not the direct subject of this bill. But can I ask whether the government will make a progress report on its more recent work covering these matters? They include human rights and labour protections at sea. There are shocking examples of human rights law being broken, with forced labour and appalling working conditions. And they include breaches of maritime security, including piracy and armed robbery at sea. Many such crimes take place partly because of the failure of regulation resulting from the system of flags of convenience which cries out for reform. There is a need for an ocean strategy, which was requested by Sarah Champion, MP, in another place, and I wonder if the Minister can respond on that. Turning to the central purpose of this bill, the Select Committee also identified the importance of protecting biodiversity, the temperature of in the context of climate change and dangerous increases in the temperature of the ocean. In doing so, it pointed out the huge role the oceans play in absorbing carbon dioxide released since industrialization. It also took evidence on the damage land-based pollution causes to the marine environment, such as ocean acidification and changes to ocean circulations, which in turn can destroy marine species and the vital environments, such as coral reefs and mangrove forests that support them. Therefore, I welcome this bill and congratulate the government for introducing it and ask that it complete its enactment in time for the ratification of the treaty. The Minister has explained already the urgent need to put it into domestic law, protections which apply to international rather than domestic waters. The bill is largely technical, however. The section on marine genetic resources strikes me as particularly important. Valuable scientific projects on the high seas are being carried out by British teams, often in international collaborations. I support new regulatory requirements extending reporting to the Secretary of State, and I do not believe that responsible scientists should see this as over-intensive regulation. I also support the area board management tools set out in Part 3 of the bill. I have two questions for the Minister. First, will the UK regulatory bodies, such as the Marine Management Organisation, with their new powers to act in international waters, need to abide by principles set out in the Environment Act of 1921, such as the polluter pays and the precautionary principle? Second, how does the government intend to work with non-signatories? And here I follow up on what Lord Hannay has just said. In particular, the US, which did sign up originally, but will not ratify the treaty. It is surely vital that we try to persuade them to take into account the issues that it raises. I end by welcoming what the Minister said in another place on UK support for a moratorium on deep-sea mining. I also welcome her statement that the UK will lead the world in the vital protection of our shared oceans, which was endorsed just now by my noble friend, the new Minister, opening the debate today, and I'm sure the Minister in winding will want to say the same.
The noble Lord, the Minister, to his place and express my admiration that his maiden speech has been proposing such an important debate. Now, we know that the areas outside the territorial limits, which we know as the high seas, belong to us all, and nobody would sensibly talk against the sensible proposals to protect the deep blue lungs of the world and the natural fauna and flora that live there. Now, I've sailed across the Atlantic in a tall ship. I've sailed atop a dinghy in the Sargasso Sea, mentioned by my noble friend, the Baroness. And it's probably maybe one of the few members of your Lordship's House to have been as close to the briny as I have. And last week, I was in Trinidad highlighting deep shipping, bringing 50,000-ton deadweight tankers via ocean trade to the United Kingdom. They are my bona fides. So in my remarks, I want to focus on two themes. Now, firstly, that the deep ocean supports shipping, fibre optics, pipelines, and the connectors that sustain a global economy. This can't just be about the turtles, as important as they are. And secondly, to point out that amongst all the mutual backslapping and self-congratulation in this room, there is a proverbial elephant in the room, or should I say the blue whale, and I'm referring to the risks of the uninsured dark fleet, which is the Wild West, and which operates outside the conventions and the rules of the sea. And by omitting to mention these two items, the bill is deficient. And this second reading provides an opportunity for the government to repair that defect. Because the natural environment must be shared with the commercial environment, which is the medium across which ships pass between countries in pursuit of global trade that brings 90% of goods to our nation. So I'm disappointed that the bill doesn't realise the reality is that London is the place where global shipping meets, trades and agrees rules and contracts. That's a missed opportunity, and it ignores the global expertise on our doorstep. So I depart from my noble friend the Baroness Coffey in saying this bill should not be amended, because I think it should be. Because I'm concerned that Part 3 and Clause 11 in particular, as the Secretary of State to make proposals for the inclusion of certain areas, and in Clause 12 provides for enforcement. But neither in this part nor in the bill more widely are the economy or the London stakeholders mentioned or referred to. Because I've read the treaty and it makes passing reference to the IMO. But I would have expected the bill documentation to have made reference not just to the IMO, which is based in London, but Lloyd's, marine insurers, publishers of Lloyd List, based in London. The global P&I clubs, the regulatory syndicates, which are hosted in Leadenhall Street in London, and Clarkson and Braemar, the world's leading shipbrokers, just round the corner in Trafalgar Square in London, Baltic Exchange in London, and I haven't even mentioned the whole panoply of other professionals in lawyers and contracts, people like Clyde's, for example, Hyde & Co., who are the specialist shipping lawyers. In essence, we don't own ships anymore, but the ships play by London's rules. But you'd never guess it from this bill. And we should rectify that deficiency. So, there you go. So where are the statutory tests that will require the Secretary of State, in pursuance of the powers, to consider the important balance between the economy, between shipping, between our interests and our regulatory interest based in London? Because failure to reach the appropriate balance could end up with the equivalent of another £100 million bat bridge or another useless £700 million fish disco. That's the jeopardy we face. So I said that the shipping world plays by London's rules, and for the most part it does, but we are missing the reference to the dark fleet, which is a network of ships, often poorly maintained, transporting illicit cargoes, obscured ownership, lack of insurance, deceptive tactics, going dark, flag hopping, bilge cleaning at sea, and full of hostile actors, and we had a debate last week on that narrow point. I'm mentioning it because the dark fleet poses significant risks, not only for maritime safety, but also for the environmental damage that this bill is seeking to remedy. And silence on our approach to the dark fleet and other hostile actors diminishes the effectiveness of this bill. Now, I know the noble Lord, the Minister, is maiding outing, but I know he's got a huge amount of experience, having been a Member of Parliament in the other place for Southampton. So I respectfully ask him, how can we spend precious parliamentary time on only half the benefit without considering those modern pirates of the high seas? If we're sincere about protecting our fragile ecosystems, then we need to ensure that all ships not just ships of the compliant nations, recognise the objectives of this bill. And whilst we slap each other on the back, we need to recognise that London, and in its widest sense, the economy, is balanced between these well-meaning and important biodiversity objectives. But without a strong economy, we won't be able to enforce the environment in the way that we want to, in a world that's full of bad actors.
My Lords, I too welcome Lord Whitehead as the new Minister, and particularly agree with his comment on the excellence of the National Oceanographic Centre in Southampton. There is another important maritime organisation also based in Southampton, namely the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, and I declare my interest as the chair of the MCA, the regulator of the maritime sector and shipping, and also as an honorary officer in the Royal Navy. And I'm therefore prompted immediately to respond to some of the important points that Lord Fuller has just made. I totally agree with his paean of praise for the importance of the maritime sector in the UK. Although, in fairness, I do think we have to accept that the scope of this bill is restricted specifically to the implementation of the BBNJ Treaty, and therefore I interpret his speech as a call for a broader piece of maritime legislation in a future King's speech, which would enable us to tackle many of the vital points that he's just raised. Yes, go on.
Noble member give way. I think it's important because I've read the treaty, and the treaty says nothing in this agreement shall prevent a party, ourselves, from adopting more stringent measures with respect to its nationals and vessels with regard to activities under its jurisdiction when control in addition to those adopted under this part in accordance with the international law and in support of the objectives of the agreement. So I hear what you say about the scope, but we have the power in front of us to extend that scope, and I think we should do, because London is the heart of the global shipping. People look to London to set the lead, and we have an opportunity to do so, but this bill does not.
Well, I'm actually going to come on and discuss that very point, because I think he's referring to Article 25 of the treaty, and it is something that would be worth testing more with the government. But before getting to that, I just wanted to start by saying that, like other noble lords, I think we have to recognise this BBNG treaty is actually an important evolutionary moment in international maritime law, really sort of going back to the debate that kicked off in the early 1700s between Grotius and Selden about open seas and closed seas, and here we have the common heritage of the oceans and a practical mechanism for making at least incremental progress. But we perhaps shouldn't get too carried away with optimism, because frankly the scale and the urgency of the challenge as to what's happening in our oceans, our life support system, demands at the very least the measures set out in this bill, and probably more. So I think the question that we'll be wanting to test is how, as this bill and the treaty more generally is implemented, will it actually have practical impact? And there are just several areas I might raise with the Minister. The first is the question about the exemptions for intellectual property around marine genetic resources. And look, there's a reasonable balance to be struck here. I think the Minister, Seaman Malhotra, in the Commons has said that the government will not notify for data that is protectable under IP provisions, but it would be useful to hear more from ministers as to how they think the IP regime will work in juxtaposition to the kind of broader public goals of the treaty itself. Secondly, there are obviously, as a number of noble lords have talked about, links between this bill and other maritime legal regimes, in particular the International Seabed Authority, and the area does not correspond to the high seas, as we know. And I totally endorse the point Lord Krebs made, which is that the mining, even if it's under the exploratory category through the ISA, clearly will have consequences for marine biology and diversity. And so understanding from the government what sort of influence and force field can continue to be placed around the ISA to ensure that, for example, they adopt the more rigorous environmental assessment standards implied by the BBNJ Treaty, hearing more about how in practice they think that will work will be of great importance. And then finally, on the enforcement point, the reality is that under UNCLOS, as we've heard from other noble lords, IUU fishing, overexploitation in coastal MPAs, but certainly the high seas, is continuing. Flag hopping, flags of convenience, fake flags, all of these stand in the way of the goals that are set out in the treaty. And so, coming back to Lord Fuller's point, my question relates to Article 25 of the treaty, where it says at 25.4, the parties can adopt measures over and above the flagging measure that is set out in our domestic bill here to support the implementation of the decisions and recommendations of the Conference of the Parties. Does that mean, for example, an enhanced role for constabulary or fisheries protection type interventions in the high seas where they are designated area-based management zones or MPAs? And an early test case for this might be the opportunity to develop an MPA covering the so-called blue hole north of the Falklands on the border, the EEZ with Argentina, where this is precisely the sort of mechanism that could correspond to a long-standing problem. And if we saw action there, we would begin to believe that this bill, this act, has teeth.
I speak as a member replacing Lord Grantchester on the Environment and Climate Change Committee, and as a resident of the North Shields Fish Quay, on the mouth of the Tyne, that's you go to Newcastle and turn right, which is currently celebrating 800 years since its foundation. Well worth a visit for anyone who's got a day to spare. Now, I've never considered the Lord Ahmed, noble Lord Ahmed, to have been such an eco-warrior, because, but fair play to him, it was he who was one of the early signatories of the 145 signatories representing nations to this agreement, which gives rise to this piece of legislation. So credit was credit due. Without that signatory, we wouldn't be where we are today, and also credit to Baroness Coffey for her role in that too. I'd also like to welcome the return to Parliament of Labour's own green energy warrior, the noble Lord Alan Whitehead, who spoke with great authority, experience and expertise when making his impassioned maiden speech, for which he is to be truly congratulated. Now, among others celebrating the regulation that we are about to pass of the deep blue seas will be the sharks, whales, turtles and other marine life who can be assured that the nations recognise the need to exercise control over their own activities and craft sailing in the high seas. This is excellent news, and the government are also to be congratulated for committing to this legislation. It is unfortunate, as Lord Hannay pointed out, that some countries haven't yet signed, but the door remains open for that to happen. Now, our failure to pass this legislation, and I notice Lord Fuller has some objections to it, would have a seriously detrimental effect upon the UK's ability to influence the wider community and presents a risk of reputational damage to our position as one of the leaders in achieving global biodiversity targets. The bill will achieve a number of important things. MPAs will be established on the high seas, meaning they should benefit from protections just as their own waters do. Fair and shared access to the benefits of research and discovery, which will benefit the health and well-being of all signatory nations, meaning that smaller nations, less economically powerful nations, will not be disadvantaged as breakthroughs are made in medicine and agricultural fields. And it will strengthen our environmental impact assessments in order to determine whether potential gains outweigh the risk of marine exploration. It will increase and improve capacity in building and technology transfers, making for a sustainable and inclusive ocean economy and overcoming the unlicensed approach. I just have one question for the Minister. How big of a deal is the absence of nations such as the United States from early signatory of this agreement?
Thank you for allowing me to speak to the bill in the gap and to congratulate the Minister, Lord Whitehead, for his excellent maiden speech. And as he said, this bill is about ambition. This important piece of legislation is to protect 2/3 of the world's oceans with the jurisdiction of a single nation, the home of precious inhabitants and the ecosystems which provide delicate health needed. In providing and including marine protected areas for generations to come, as we all know, our world's oceans are under significant threat. This bill incorporates protecting and improving the marine environment in the UK, as well as internationally, to meet the global commitment of protecting 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. Oceans need action now from international communities to help forge international relationships to ensure exploitation is curtailed. Bottom trawl fishing too is highly destructive and damages the seabed, is still permitted, so I vehemently hope this practice can and will be halted. The UK's attention too is drawn to hidden overfishing to the extent illegal discards or bycasts are unaccounted for in our fishing quotas. As we continue to overfish and pollute our oceans, so action again is very much needed. Into the equation too is plastic production, and waste doubled in the last 15 to 20 years. To the extent we now see plastic floating in our oceans, that too has to be taken to task in order to breathe back life to protect our vital marine corridors for our endangered marine mammals and birds. Oceans matter. They are host to almost 80% of all life forms of biodiversity, which transcends our national borders. It is pleasing to note 60 countries have already ratified the treaty reached in September 25, when Morocco and Sierra Leone deposited the 60th and 61st instruments of ratification. And this will come into force next month, January 26, a huge step forward. From the oceans to the Chagos Islands, which include vast marine protected areas around the islands, provides a safe corridor for migratory species. So if we are to hand over the islands, can I ask what assurances have been given by Mauritius for marine protection with ensured future funding? This bill, my lords, will play a significant part enabling protecting our shared blue belt from further irreversible harm to enable healthy oceans for a healthy planet. And I support UK to meet its international commitments and reinforce its leadership in global ocean governance and support sustainable marine resource use. My lords, I look forward to the noble lady the Minister for her replies.
My lords, I absolutely welcome the noble Lord Whitehead to the opposition, to the government from the opposition, where I used to work with him very closely. And I absolutely guarantee to him, if we can continue the cooperation that we had in trying to achieve the areas in climate change and energy that we often discussed, then these benches will be absolutely behind you. I know I said to you that when you said you were going to resign from your seat at the next general election, I was very sure that you would rebound back into this House, and here we are. So our congratulations from these benches. And the Liberal Democrats and these benches really welcome this bill and indeed the treaty quite clearly. And of course, it's always great to speak in the House when all sides of the House are pretty well in one. I just have a slight trepidation in that the Lord Callanan, who is following me, has a reputation for being quite combative in this House. And I'll be interested to see what he has to say. So I'm still in some trepidation as to the unanimity of the House. But we will see. The Earl of Courtown sounded positive, so that's something. I think the measure that, or the way that we really judge it from these benches in terms of the government, and I've said this to the ministers before, is that of how ambitious is the United Kingdom, not just in ratifying this treaty, but actually making it work, do something, and add to global biodiversity and the health of our planet. And I was very pleased that the noble Lord the Minister was very positive in that way. But I have to say, like the noble Baroness Lady Coffey, I also read the Overseas Territory Biodiversity Strategy, which was released last week, and there is that one mention of the BBNJ in there, as the noble Baroness pointed out very well, only mentioned in some 120 pages, which was Bermuda and the Sargasso Sea. I would still be very interested to hear from the Minister when she responds to this debate, what other specific areas, I particularly like the Falklands, particularly in terms of the Argentinian connection as well. I think that's an excellent suggestion. But let's have an agenda there that actually works. One of the areas, ironically, that is not really covered by this biodiversity treaty, and we have to remember the major frustration is we can't actually amend the treaty. We can only amend the legislation. So it's there. We like it. We would have all liked it, I'm sure, to be stronger, but we can't change that. But in terms of one of the areas it really leaves out, it is actually fisheries, which is the biggest threat to biodiversity, I would say, and has been over time, apart maybe from climate change and acidification that others have mentioned. That the threat has been fisheries. Now, we are a member of 5 so-called regional fisheries management organisations, which span those high seas. 2 tuna ones, one in the Indian Ocean, a salmon Atlantic one, and 2 the North-East Atlantic and North-West Atlantic fishing organisations. And those organisations, because of the enforcement problems that we know that we have great intentions, are important, but are not as strong as they need to be. And my question is to the Minister, do we have an agenda? Do we have a wish? Do we have a determination, apart from just ratifying this treaty, to actually make those regional fisheries management organisations work better and to be more effective, to, if you like, surf the wave further towards helping biodiversity? The other side I want to come on, and I was delighted that Baroness Blackstone mentioned this, because I was on the same committee as her, the International Relations, when we looked at the UNCLOS treaty, which in a way is what would we call the Achilles heel of this treaty, because its fundamental status is saying, from way back in history, outside territorial waters and certainly outside EEZs on the high seas, you cannot intervene on other flagged vessels without going through a very long process. And that is a particular problem because of the way that flag states operate. And as noble lords, I'm sure, will know, the major nations that have the biggest fleets and tonnage are Liberia, Panama and the Marshall Islands. And the UK is number 27th on that list. We have 1,000 vessels over 100 tons. Panama has 8 times that number. But when it comes to tonnage, we only have 1/25th of the tonnage that Panama has. And that is because operators, states, companies, they choose their own flag of convenience, and often they are not able to respond in the way that they do. So I think absolutely fundamental, and as Baroness Blackstone pointed out, in order to make enforceability and effectiveness of this treaty much better, we have to try to tighten up on that situation. Now, that report that we referred to asked the government to look again at the 1986 UN Convention on Conditions for Registration of Ships. Now, that's some time ago, and indeed there have only been some 17 ratifications. It needs 40 to come into force. But I would love for the United Kingdom to re-energise that treaty and try to get it implemented. I think it would make a huge difference in terms of enforceability for this bill. If we move on to the genetic and digital sequence side, we've mentioned the United States of America, which did sign under the Biden administration this treaty, but is absolutely not ever during the Trump administration going to sign it. It just isn't. We might talk and say strongly to the United States, but there's no way they're going to sign this treaty. And in fact, when it comes to the International Marine Organization that we talked about, really important, works over the other side of the Thames, America, 2 months ago, actually, through intimidation, stopped an international agreement that was about to be signed
are made around carbon emissions of vessels on the high seas. That treaty was sunk, literally, by the United States through very aggressive activity. So there is no chance whatsoever of the United States signing this one. My question, though, to the Minister is, what stops, if you like, the excellent data sharing and sharing of scientific information for genetic, genetic material and digital sequence information? If British companies or British people wish to do that, what is to stop them then offshoring that activity to the United States and carrying it out there without having to comply with this treaty? Now, that's a difficult one. I'd be interested to understand whether the government's thought about that and what it might do. My last point is that, and here's the thing, internationally, we need to look in the mirror as well, and a number of noble lords have said this. We are not perfect ourselves in terms of looking after our biodiversity within our own waters and our own EEZ. And the recent draft DEFRA strategic look at fisheries and biodiversity has pointed out that the Northeast Atlantic is one of the worst in terms of depletion of fisheries and biodiversity. So we have that in our own backyard. We need to get this right. And Lord Krebs and I have often called for remote electronic monitoring, not just of our own fleet, but anybody that comes in our own EEZ. The government has a consultation out on that. It is trying, it's one of two trials, which had very little reaction from the fisheries industry. And I believe this would be good for them as well as for us. So let's do that. My lords, these benches really welcome this treaty. We want to get it through quickly. We want it ratified. We want the United Kingdom to be positive and implementer and one of the nations that makes sure that this treaty, difficult though it is a real success for the high seas.
My lords, well, firstly, let me start by joining with others in welcoming the noble lord, Lord Whitehead, to his place on the opposition front bench. When I was a minister in Desnes and he was Shadow Energy Minister in the other place, we often appeared on panels and seminars together, actually very rarely disagreed on most of the issues. So I know he understands the energy brief extremely well, and I'm sure he'll be a great success in his ministerial position, and I look forward to seeing how he progresses. I'm sorry to disappoint the noble lord, Lord Teverson, but we actually support this important bill, implementing a landmark agreement which we actually signed when we were in government, as my noble friend Baroness Coffey and my noble friend the Earl of Courtown reminded us. Biodiversity is important both here and abroad, and the government is right to continue our work to protect marine diversity both at home and on our high seas. As my noble friend the Earl of Courtown said in his opening speech, we had in government a strong record on biodiversity. Beyond signing the UN agreement on marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, even more of a mouthful than this treaty, we implemented our world-leading Blue Belt programmes. We supported our overseas territories in delivering protection for endemic marine biodiversity. Meanwhile, we ensured that around 40% of the UK's domestic waters are protected by appropriate marine protected areas. These efforts, which are a continuation of the policy started by the previous government, put the UK at the forefront of the global effort to protect 30% of global seas by 2030. Ministers will have our support as they work to protect the world's oceans from the harms of overfishing, pollution and climate change. But of course we do need to get the details right, and we will be monitoring the government's approach to ensure that they really are doing the best that we can to protect both marine biodiversity in our home waters, as well as playing a full role in our worldwide effort to protect our oceans. As we have already heard from a number of speakers in today's debate, the UK is doing a great deal already to protect marine biodiversity, but protecting our oceans, as a number of noble lords have reminded us, of course cannot be achieved unilaterally. So could the noble Baroness, the Minister, when she replies, provide the House with an update on the work that her department and others in government are doing to ensure that our partners across the world are doing their part in also protecting our oceans. What processes, for example, exist under this treaty to ensure that signatories fulfil their obligations, and what consequences would there be for a nation that is a signatory to the treaty who fails to fulfil those obligations? Without firm commitment from all signatories, we will struggle to achieve the benefits for marine biodiversity, so it is essential that the UK continues to play a full role in encouraging other global partners to step up to the demands of this treaty. Could the Minister also confirm whether the UK will support other signatories where they lack the necessary administrative or scientific expertise, for example, to fulfil their obligations under the treaty? And if so, what form would that support take, and how would it be funded? The location of the new marine protected areas, as my noble friend said in his speech, is important. Any clarity that ministers can provide on that would, I'm sure, be helpful to the House as we consider this treaty. It has also been noted already that it will come into effect in early 2026. I hope the Minister will be able to confirm that, and any other timelines which go along with the secondary legislation, I think, would also be helpful to the House. And how many of those MPAs will include prohibitions on fishing when they are introduced. We on these benches are proud to back the UK fishing industry, so of course we need to get the balance right between MPAs that rightly prohibited overfishing while continuing to protect the sustainability of our fishing industry. And I won't repeat the point on EU fishing rights in UK waters, but we are disappointed with the government's approach on this. We will continue to hold the government to account on. It is essential to get the balance right for our fishing communities who have been, in our view, badly treated by the agreements that this government has made. My noble friend, the Earl of Courtown, I think, summed up our approach to this bill very well at the beginning of this debate. We will not seek to delay or undermine this important piece of legislation, and we want to support the government in getting the bill, which is necessary for ratification, onto the statute books in good time, not least to allow ratification to happen before the treaty comes into effect early next year. That said, we will of course look at the bill in detail as it progresses through its stages. In the other place, we sought to amend the regulation making powers to improve parliamentary accountability. A number of members have referred to that. We also sought to require ministers to report to Parliament on the use of those powers under this Act and the enforcement of the treaty. And we will return to the issues of accountability and reporting at committee stage, as well as looking at the impact of the treaty on UK-based businesses, particularly, as I mentioned, the sustainability of our fishing fleet. A number of noble lords, Baroness Young of Old Scone, my noble friend Baroness Redfern, mentioned the important issue of the UK's approach to the Chagos archipelago. Now, we debated this extensively during the recent treaty legislation, and the noble Baroness knows well that we are extremely concerned about the government's political decision to hand over the islands to Mauritius. This means that the UK will no longer be able to play a full role, as we would have played previously, in protecting the rich marine biodiversity around those islands. Mauritius is also a signatory to the UN Agreement on Marine Biological Diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, and the UK's treaty with Mauritius establishes a marine protected area around the islands, although we are extremely concerned with their ability to actually enforce it. So could the noble Baroness, the Minister, please take the opportunity to set out what levers and mechanisms the UK will retain to be able to use under the UN agreement to ensure that Mauritius does fulfil its obligations on marine biodiversity. So, my lords, we will not waver in our support for global collaboration on marine biodiversity. Healthy oceans are essential, and this treaty is, in our view, a real step forward in the fight against the harms of overfishing, pollution and climate change. Ministers are right to continue the excellent work that we started in this area, but of course we reserve the right to perhaps disagree with some of the details and to scrutinise this bill in detail when it progresses to its next legislative stage.
My Lords, I would like to begin by congratulating, as others have, the noble Lord Whitehead on his excellent maiden speech. He brings to this House a wealth of experience from his distinguished career in energy and environmental policy, and I know that both the House and the Government in particular will benefit greatly from his insight in the months and years ahead. And I'd speak personally as well. I know that he brings great insight, experience, but also an incredibly dry sense of humour. And behind the sort of very serious demeanour, he has an incredible wit and has had me in absolute stitches on many occasions. But I'll leave everybody else to look forward to those moments ahead. I'm also grateful to all noble lords who've contributed to today's debate. I think it's been thoughtful, constructive and rigorous, and we've heard this afternoon that I think many of the views reflect the House when it is at its best. It's been particularly encouraging to hear broad support across all benches for this important piece of legislation. I think Lord Teverson, though, did make a very important point that I expect I'll be making on repeat as we move forward with the bill, which is that, yes, there are many things that we might wish to see done around fishing, around bottom trawling, around protection, around marine protected areas, all of these things. But this particular bill is about implementing a treaty. And the trouble with international treaties is they have to be negotiated. The process is long, it can be fraught, there are trade-offs. It is never a treaty that you could, that would be only what we would wish to see. There are inevitably compromises. This is about implementing the outcome of that process. It's good, it's not perfect, there is a long, long way to go. Not everything we may wish to do is in this implementing legislation, but it is still the right thing, and it's important that the UK is a signatory to this, and as Baroness Young of Old Scone says, that we get on with this and that we're able to take our place at the Conference of Parties early next year. And she wants assurances that we'll do that, and without wanting to ratchet the pressure on noble lords, that is kind of down to us, because the UK cannot ratify any treaty until we have our own legislative house in order, and that's what this bill is designed to do. And I think many noble lords actually encouraged us to try and persuade others who've not yet decided to sign up to take part, and Lord Hannay, I know, did this, Baroness Blackstone, Lord Lenny, I'm sure others did as well. I think we should do that, we intend to do that. Our position, our ability to persuade others to become signatories, I would say, is greatly enhanced once we have done our implementing legislation ourselves and we are signatories to the treaty. My Lords, allow me to just return to first principles and to remind the House why this bill and the BBNJ agreement are vital. The agreement represents a landmark step forward in the stewardship of our shared ocean. It provides the international framework needed to protect the 2/3 of the global ocean that lie beyond the jurisdiction of any single state, areas that contain some of the most biodiverse, fragile and least understood ecosystems on the planet. The agreement will help deliver the ambitions of the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including the global target to effectively conserve and manage at least 30% of the ocean by 2030. These ambitions are not merely environmental aspirations, they are economic necessities. This agreement also advances the UK's wider climate and nature agenda. It reinforces our commitment to multilateral cooperation and strengthens the rule of international law. In doing so, it reaffirms the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea as the cornerstone of global ocean governance. The bill also positions the United Kingdom to take full advantage of the opportunities presented by this new international regime. And I think this is something that Lord Stevens and my noble friend Lord Whitehead got at in their contributions as well. We are home to one of the world's leading marine science communities. The National Oceanography Centre, the Marine Biological Association and our world-class university departments are at the cutting edge of global marine science. Provisions in the agreement promoting transparency, open data, capacity building and the equitable sharing of benefits from marine genetic resources will help ensure that this scientific excellence continues to flourish. These reforms will foster collaboration, support innovation and deepen global understanding of the high seas, while keeping the UK at the forefront of ocean research and discovery. So I will just answer a couple of things that Noble Lords raised that weren't in the bill, because I know they are of profound interest to many Noble Lords, and if the House will just indulge me in doing this. But Lord Krebs, and I think some other Noble Lords as well, asked about the issue of deep sea mining. Just to make it clear, the UK supports a moratorium on deep sea mining until robust environmental safeguards and appropriate regulations in place. This means that the UK will not sponsor or support the issuing of exploitation contracts by the International Seabed Authority until there is, or unless there is, sufficient scientific evidence to assess the potential impact of deep sea mining activities on marine ecosystems and strong enforceable environmental regulation standards and guidelines that have been developed and adopted by the International Seabed Authority. And Noble Lords can take their own view on how likely that is to happen anytime soon. Similarly, not included in this bill because it's not part of the agreement, but it is nevertheless important to many Noble Lords, is this issue of bottom trawling, which was raised by the Bishop of Norwich and Baroness Redfern as well. The Marine Management Organisation has consulted on restricting bottom-towed gear fishing in 41 offshore marine protected areas, covering around 30,000 square kilometres of English waters. The consultation closed on the 29th of September and responses are now being analysed. And this forms part of the government's ambitious programme to protect all English marine protected areas from harmful activity where needed to meet national and international commitments. But I think the points that they made were well made, and the government does take them on board, even though it's not, strictly speaking, part of this bill. On enforcement, many Noble Lords are understandably interested in this, not least Lord Krebs, Baroness Jones, Lord Stevens and Lord Callanan. The BBNJ agreement establishes an implementation and compliance committee to facilitate and consider the implementation of and promote compliance with the provisions of the agreement. Part 9 of the BBNJ agreement contains provisions on the settlement of disputes. As far as domestic plans go, enforcement plans here differ within each specific measure in the bill. For marine genetic resource measures, Clause 9 of the bill includes a power to make provision about the enforcement of requirements in respect of marine genetic resource obligations, which allows for the imposition of civil sanctions, including monetary penalties, stop notices and compliance notices. For area-based management tools, regulations made under Clause 11 may include provision about enforcement. The nature of enforcement provisions may differ depending on the regulations made, and I will say something about regulations in a minute, and the activities that they are regulating. However, enforcement could include civil or criminal sanctions or powers to detain craft. On ratification, we're making the necessary domestic legislative changes in this bill, as I've said, and the relevant secondary legislation to ensure that we're able to fully implement our obligations under the agreement before ratifying very soon. Once this bill and associated legislation is passed, the UK can proceed to ratify the agreement by depositing the instrument of ratification at the United Nations. This issue of delegated powers, I mean, it really would be the end of days to get through a bill like this without having a long discussion about powers, and I'd be very sure that we will return to this in committee, but Noble Lord Courtdown, Baroness Coffey, Baroness Jones, and I think several others referred to this. I'm going to read out what I have here, and then we will return to this next time we meet. But delegated powers have been taken to ensure that the UK can continue to comply with its international obligations Under the BBNJ agreement, the powers will, in many cases, be exercised following future decisions or determinations taken by the Conference of the Parties to the BBNJ agreement. Following the passage of the bill and relevant secondary legislation and subsequent ratification of the agreement, the UK will be a party to the agreement and will have the opportunity to shape future decisions taken at the Conference of the Parties meetings. What I think this means is that we need the flexibility in order to implement future decisions, but we can discuss the appropriate process that should be taken and the need for parliamentary involvement and oversight of those things, and I'm sure that we will do that thoroughly. Baroness Blackstone referred to scientists and researchers, and our impact assessments for the BBNJ bill haven't identified any significant costs for scientists and researchers. For example, the pre- and post-cruise notification requirements mirror to a large extent the information that researchers are already required to provide as part of an application for consent to conduct research within the territorial sea or EEZ of a state. The BBNJ is not expected to have a significant or disproportionate impact on small or micro businesses. The number of UK-linked small and medium-sized businesses operating in the affected sectors isn't expected to be high. The agreement does offer important opportunities for the UK, which is one of the world's leading marine scientific research communities. And on the cost of implementation, my noble friend Lord Grantchester asked about this. I suppose at this stage it is difficult to say what the final institutional size and structure of the BBNJ will look like. It's realistic to look at something like the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is based in Montreal. Using that as a model, the UK thinks that its contribution, including both the standard assessed contribution and the institutional budget and the 50% top-up, could total around £1 million annually. On the issue of overseas territories, Noble Lord Courtdown, Baroness Coffey, Lord Teverson, I recall mentioning overseas territories. I think it's really important that we're clear about the extent of this. There are no immediate plans for the UK to extend the BBNJ agreement to the overseas territories or Crown dependencies. But if any of the overseas territories were to decide that in future that they wished for the BBNJ agreement to be extended to them, then they would need to have appropriate domestic legislation in place before doing so. And that's why a permissive extent clause is included in the bill, which would enable part or all of this bill to be extended to any of the British overseas territories or the Isle of Man in future if they wished, as part of their domestic implementation of the BBNJ agreement. And this clause has been included following relevant engagement with the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies of the Isle of Man, the Bailiwick of Jersey and the Bailiwick of Guernsey. Nobody asked about devolution, but I feel I should say anyway that we're working closely with the devolved administrations, including the Scottish Government, Northern Ireland Executive, to ensure legislative consent for the bill. These discussions are ongoing, and we hope to have legislative consent motions secured from each legislature by the time of the Lords' report stage of the bill. Baroness Coffey asked about Antarctica. The Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica, as she knows, is governed by the Antarctic Treaty System, which has placed the question of territorial sovereignty over the continent in abeyance. Article 5, Part 2 of the BBNJ agreement states that it shall be applied in a manner that does not undermine other legal frameworks, and the UK made a declaration on signature of the agreement stating that the Antarctic Treaty System comprehensively addresses the legal, political and environmental considerations unique to that region and provides a comprehensive framework for the international management of the Antarctic. So, as such, the measures in this bill with respect to marine genetic resource won't apply to marine genetic resource activities carried out in Antarctica, as defined in the Antarctic Act 1994, or to marine genetic resources and digital sequence information on these resources from Antarctica. It's for the Antarctic Treaty System to regulate these activities. The Lord Courtdown asked about the impact on UK fishing. The BBNJ does not contain any provision in respect of UK fishers conducting commercial fishing activities, and I appreciate noble lords have many views on this, and this is a great opportunity to express them, but this bill doesn't have those provisions within it because these activities are governed under the Fisheries Act 2020. The fishing and fishing-related activities are exempt from the requirements of the BBNJ agreement relating to marine genetic resources. As such, the BBNJ bill excludes UK fishers conducting commercial fishing activities from the application of its provisions on marine genetic resources. Requirements to conduct environmental impact assessments in relation to fishing are managed through existing legal frameworks and global and regional fisheries bodies. As a party to the agreement, the UK will be involved in the decision-making process for area-based management tools and will carefully consider any proposals to understand any potential impacts on UK fishing. And that's why it's important that we're able to ratify so we can take our seat at the first conference of the parties and make sure that we have a say in these sorts of issues. Lord Stevens and Lord Teverson asked specific questions on marine genetic resource. Article 10, Part 2 of the BBNJ agreement is clear that the marine genetic resource collection provisions do not apply to fishing and fishing-related activities. Clause 8, Part 1A and B of the bill implement this exception. And I'm sure we can come back in more detail to these issues when we get to committee. But, Noble Lords, I do thank members from across the House for their thoughtful and constructive contributions to this debate. I've tried to address as many of the points raised as I can, but anything I've missed, I'm sure we can come back to when we meet very shortly. This is a landmark piece of legislation. It ensures that the UK can ratify and take full part in the international BBNJ work at the United Nations. The measures it contains will not only safeguard marine ecosystems and strengthen our environmental security, but they'll also deliver real benefits for the UK's research and innovation community. The bill represents the UK taking decisive action, protecting the ocean that sustains us all, while empowering the scientists, innovators and institutions that are shaping its future. And I commend this bill to the House.
Yeah. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. As many as of that opinion will say content. The contrary, not content. The contents have it. Going to commit it? Committee.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I beg to move that the bill be considered in Grand Committee.
In a committee
then. Got it. The question is that this bill be committed to a Grand Committee. As many as of that opinion will say content. And contrary, not content. The contents have it. Before I call the next business, it might be a good time for noble lords involved in second reading to leave. Motion to resolve not to approve the draft statutory guidance presented to Parliament pursuant to the Football Governance Act 2025. Lord Moynihan.
My Lords, I rise to move my amendment. I've initiated this debate because the question of who is captured as a person of significant influence or control under the Act inextricably links to the regulatory regime they will have to follow, and that will determine the success or failure of the Football Governance Act. And now, my lords, we need to get it right. Clarity is the key word here. We need clarity to have effective regulation, and good regulation is absolutely essential for the success of EFL clubs and Premier League clubs alike. Unlike in the passage of the bill, during the debates during the passage of the bill, we're all at one on this. We need to get this right because that's the best way of ensuring financial success of professional football. Just one reason was given by the Minister for Sport to introduce the statutory guidance in another place on October the 27th, when she stated that the purpose of the statutory guidance on the meaning of significant influence or control under Section 1 of the Act was, and I quote, to ensure that fans can identify the real persons exercising control of their clubs, notwithstanding any opaque or complex ownership structures. This will give fans the much-needed transparency they deserve. She added just one further observation. This delivers the government's election promises to combat poor governance and financial mismanagement of football clubs in this country. Unfortunately, my lords, as drafted, it does no such thing. As the noble Baroness, the Minister, helpfully contributed during the passage of the bill, the concrete benefits to fans are a few statutory protections of mainly heritage items, typically club names, crests, courtesy of my noble friend Lord Parkinson, home colours and home ground, and consultation, which already exists in most of the professional clubs in this country. There are no fan veto powers. What it does do is to create far tougher owners and directors tests than exist anywhere in the world, and it overlaps with UEFA and the Premier League and the EFL's requisite regulation. And there's no clear definition in the guidance about the meaning of integrity or competence or indeed source of funds. In fact, the stated objective of the regulator is to go further than the Premier League does at the moment, requiring each and every club to list in the personnel statement those of, and I quote, significant influence and control. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could confirm that the final rules on guidance and regulation will come before the personal statements are requested from clubs. My lords, most Premier League clubs sit inside a multi-club organisation, and most of the owners live in jurisdictions abroad, where identifying those with significant influence or control is exceptionally difficult to determine. To say the ownership of a professional football in this country is complex is an understatement. In the Premier League, there are only 2 clubs who have a solitary shareholder. The staggering complexity of the challenge for clubs is clear when you realise that ownership of Premier League football clubs is primarily international. As of the summer of this year, American ownership is 40%, Chinese 5%, Saudi Arabian 4%, Swiss 4%, Egyptian 2%, international institutions and others 2%, Greece 5%, the UAE 4%, Uruguay 2%, and the Czech Republic 1%. UK ownership stands at 22%. Yet clarity is everything. So let me ask the Minister about just one club, and I've chosen the noble Baroness, Lady Blake's club, and mine, since we're both avid supporters of Leeds United. Now, as reported in The Athletic in August this year, Leeds are now 100% owned by 49ers Enterprise Global Football LLC, a business registered in the US state of Delaware. The makeup of 49ers Enterprises is fairly opaque. All that is really known is that the current Leeds chairman, Parag Marathe, and Jed York, principal owner and CEO of the San Francisco 49ers, each own greater than 10% but less than 25% of 49ers Enterprise Partners, which wholly owns 49ers Global Football. Unravelling the rest is close to impossible, but some names of other minority shareholders in 49ers Enterprises are known. Australian businessman Peter Lowy of the global retail property company Westfield Group sits on the club board and has a shareholding. Red Bull, the energy drinks giant, acquired a little under 10% in 2024, alongside a sponsorship deal with the club. 49ers Enterprises is split into general partners and limited partners. The former is a smaller group providing most of the funding. The latter, a large group of unknown quantity contributing smaller amounts to the cause. Marathe, York and Lowy all comprise general partners, but beneath them there's a huge cast of supporting characters who have influence. The full list isn't known, but those with small holdings in the group, and thus in Leeds United, include Russell Crowe, Michael Phelps, Jordan Spieth, Justin Thomas, Russell Westbrook, TJ McConnell, Larry Nance Jr., Jim Messina, and as of May last year, the comedian Will Ferrell. Now, they can certainly exercise influence, but would they be included in the personnel statement and be subject to detailed scrutiny? How about the partners in 49ers enterprises who meet regularly and have an influence over their investment? Would they be included in the personnel statement? Indeed, from the Minister's reading of the draft statutory guidance, who are amongst those I have listed, all incidentally already known to the fans of Leeds United, would not require listing on the personnel statement, since under clause 1.6 they would. Does she believe they are all de facto owners? They have, under paragraph 110 of the guidance, the right to exercise, or actually exercise, significant influence. They all meet clause 113, the master clause of intentionally opaque drafting, which reads, there may be other ways an individual actually exercises or has the right to exercise significant influence or control over a club. But they're not mentioned. There is no definition of that. And if you don't have clarity and if you have opaqueness, you are basically providing a field day for lawyers. And Lord Panic will be in lawyers' paradise on reading this guidance. In fact, I would suggest that the government rather rapidly sign him up for the Premier League or the EFL do. For, not surprisingly for the fans, or rather for surprisingly for the fans of Leeds United, the board of directors, who most fans focus on and see at their games, when they're there virtually every match day and are under the club's spotlight, fall into the list of exceptions as officers of the club. The managing director, the sole director, non-executive director, even a non-executive chairman, such as Tottenham Hotspur have, who may have a casting vote, is on the list of accepted people in this guidance. This is because, and I quote, although being an officer of a club necessarily involves having a degree of control and influence over its activities, the guidance says it would be exceptional for an officer to have significant influence or control. And I asked the Minister, what determines the difference between a chairman being on the board with clear fiduciary responsibilities in this country being exempted from the guidance because they do not have the defined concept of significant influence? They are not, my lords, puppets of the owners. Some of them have casting rights in terms of final votes on key issues facing the future of the club. And it surely does make no sense to me why the chairman and non-executive directors of a club may be exempted from this, whereas people right down the food chain of ownership that I've mentioned are covered. And when we've sorted out this maze of uncertainty, my lords, what are the implications for those of significant influence or control? My lords, with 100 pages plus of legal backing, the football regulator has in his very first conference called for yet more powers in the case of Sheffield Wednesday. And I asked the Minister whether she knows what these additional powers that he has requested are. My lords, this guidance has a lack of clarity. It's opaque wording. And what concerns me as much for an EFL club or Premier League club is that we must not rock confidence in a highly competitive global market for investment dollars in professional football. And if you lack clarity in the regulation, that is precisely what will happen. And whilst there is much made, my lords, of the similarity of the football regulator with the FCA, does the Minister recognise that the FCA is a mature regulator, not just starting out, and that it employs 700 staff dedicated to authorisations, with decades of operational precedent and, critically, a stop-the-clock mechanism in the process, strict completeness criteria, working day calculations, and withdrawal mechanisms? Will all those be present in the regulatory regime? And does the Minister accept that many consortium structures with multiple shareholders, cross-border arrangements necessitating coordination with overseas authorities, information from the HMRC, the National Crime Agency, competition organisers and overseas regulatory bodies will make it incredibly difficult to determine who has significant influence or control? Not unreasonably, many owners are going to be nervous about putting their names forward. And will they have the time to withdraw from the personnel statements and sell out or move their interest to someone in the accepted group on page 10 between the publication of the regulatory detail and the request for personnel statements? Would the Minister advise the Saudi Crown Prince to continue to invest in Newcastle through the PIF under such an opaque regime, especially since automatic failure would be accompanied with immediate publication and no procedural safeguards to create unique reputational risk or recourse? Is it true that every failure will be immediately publicised, as indicated under clause 1.6? And if so, football clubs, whatever league they're in, will suffer? And could the Minister satisfy the House that all of the key elements, critical flexibilities, stop the clock, completeness gates, working days and working notices, warning notices, coupled with encouraging withdrawals, are necessary to enhance inward investment, which is what we all want, and growth of the professional football? And if so, why they are not published before the guidance? Does she agree that they are absolutely essential to the success of EFL and the Premier League? My Lords, in summary, the guidance challenges the competitiveness of English football clubs and creates adverse outcomes to the sporting competitiveness and growth of football by being significantly more prescriptive than the current owners and directors tests. The risk of leaks to the press regarding the processing of owners, directors and senior executive positions will deter investment and lead to serious implications of reputation for the IFR. Where are the confidentiality clauses in this document? In fact, the contrary is the case, as clubs will have to publish lists of all their relevant owners, directors and managers subject to significant influence or control tests, and the fans and the press will be able to challenge the IFR's decision in each case under section 1.6. The process was meant to apply to new and not incumbent owners, yet an assessment of an incumbent, say the Crown Prince, could be triggered if the IFR is in possession of information that gives, and I quote, grounds for concern. What grounds for concern? They are not identified or defined anywhere in the guidance. Anyone can make submissions to the IFR. There is nothing to stop this highly confidential and potentially defamatory information being made public. Yet the overwhelming commitment we see in the United Kingdom from current owners and directors, and particularly relevant to this Act in England, to run their clubs as custodians on behalf of their players, fans and communities is successful. The existing governance structures and the ongoing ability to attract interest and investment across the pyramid, but particularly within the Premier League, which benefits all the EFL clubs, has resulted in very few isolated cases of concern. The subjectivity, my lords, of the OADT test in this draft statutory guidance is deeply concerning and should be concerning to everybody in the House. Case-by-case assessment, the IFR using, quotes, judgment, and incumbents being investigated if the IFR has evidence of grounds for concern, are all vague, subjective, and damaging to investment and growth. They are, my lords, a playground for lawyers. The IFR must be able to demonstrate consistent decisions. Transparency and consistency will be key to avoid reputational risk and potential legal challenge. That, my lords, is what we need to consider carefully in this debate, and that is the reason I've brought it before the House. I think that the key concluding comment I would make is this: to have really effective regulation, as I found out when we introduced the water regulator originally back in the early 1990s, and I was Minister as part of that team to do so, was clarity and consistency and transparency. All three are missing, sadly, from this statutory guidance. And I just hope the government would take away that point and focus very carefully on changing it in the interests of investors into football, while still achieving all the objectives that they have rightly set out that they want to achieve in order to have an effective regulator. And with those concluding comments, I beg to move my amendment.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
Football paradise, but not for the reason that Lord Moynihan mentioned. It's because my team, Arsenal, I declare my interest, is top of the Premier League and top of the Champions League group, as all noble lords will know. I also declare my interest as counsel to Manchester City Football Club in ongoing, long ongoing disciplinary proceedings brought by the Premier League. Can I make 3 points on Lord Moynihan's motion? The first is that the Football Governance Act imposes a duty on the Secretary of State to prepare and publish guidance about the meaning of this phrase, significant influence or control. That's Schedule 1, paragraph 15.1, read with paragraph 2, subparagraph 1. The Secretary of State has no choice. She has to produce guidance. The second point is that this is what, in football terms, is a hospital pass. Significant influence or control is one of many legal concepts which are amorphous. They depend essentially on the facts and circumstances of the individual case. I can give many examples: reasonable care, driving without due care and attention, indecency, obscenity. None of these concepts can be defined with the precision that Lord Moynihan seeks. There's a famous case in the US Supreme Court in the 1960s when Mr. Justice Potter Stewart said in an obscenity case he couldn't define it, but he certainly knew it when he saw it. And Parliament uses a phrase such as significant influence or control and fails to define it here and in other contexts where that same phrase is used, such as the Companies Act, precisely because Parliament wants to ensure sufficient flexibility to cover such cases and circumstances as may arise from time to time which fall within the general mischief at which the Act is aimed. That's the whole point of having a phrase such as this, and Parliament, us, not defining it in the legislation. I very much hope that when the Minister comes to respond to Lord Moynihan, that she will not rise to the challenge of attempting to pronounce on the floor of the House how significant influence or control applies to the people that Lord Moynihan mentioned. It would, if I may respectfully say so, not be appropriate for a minister to attempt to prejudge how this concept applies to particular persons. And my third point I want to make, my conclusion, is that Lord Moynihan's wish to see clarity, to see precision, to see predictability greater than is offered by this guidance is wholly admirable, but it is, with great respect, completely unrealistic. I always admire Lord Moynihan's skill and his effort, but I have to say on this occasion he is quite clearly offside.
Lords, I'm also in football paradise because my club, Birmingham City, after 30 years has actually got very decent owners. And seeing Lord Panic there does remind me that Birmingham beat Arsenal in the League Cup in 2011, which he may well recall. And also, I simply wanted to ask Lord Moynihan this. I know he's raised an important issue, about essentially definitions. But why a fatal motion? Does he really think? I mean, the handful of fatal motions have ever been passed by the Lordship's House. I listened very carefully. I don't think he gave one justification for actually having a fatal motion. I don't know if I'm allowed, if he's allowed to come in again, but it would be helpful to this debate to know what on earth this is about in that respect.
My Lords, I wish to speak very briefly. My interest in this matter is actually in the Football Governance Act itself. Less in football. I have no football club interest to declare whatsoever. I just want to ask the Noble Lord, what is he trying to achieve here? Because it feels terribly as though there are all sorts of people in both houses who seem terribly keen to stop the football regulator from getting on with what they're supposed to be getting on with. This is a bill which originated in the Tory party prior to the general election. It was picked up willingly by the Labour Party while we were in opposition. I was the leader of that team at the time, and I pushed for it to be in our manifesto, and I'm absolutely delighted that it's there. There is an excellent chair of the regulator in David Cogan, who has the respect of all sides of football, who really is uniquely well qualified in his knowledge of both broadcasting and of football. And really all we need here is for them to be allowed to get on with their job. It is my understanding that they are doing so at a great speed in the interests of Football Club. And when he refers to specifics, I would just ask him, surely he wants those football clubs to survive and thrive. And that's what this regulator is about. And that's what this party wants to see, is the game of football surviving and thriving up and down all quarters, all parts of the country. And that's what the football regulator was set up to do. I really hope that he isn't trying to stand in the way of progress.
Further to the comments of my noble friend Baroness Debonair, can I just mention the fact she said that the bill had originated as a Tory proposal when she was a shadow minister. I don't think she had joined your Lordship's House when we were, a year ago, when we were going through this bill, and we had the marvellous sight of the noble Lord Parkinson, who'd moved the bill for the Tory party prior to the election, turning handstands to say why the bill was not suitable, and we really didn't need it at all, and there was all sorts of changes that had to be introduced before it could make any progress. The text for, we don't really want to make any progress at all, and I understand that was not always personal on the behalf of noble Lord Parkinson, but there were forces from, shall we say, behind him. In many cases, those influenced by connection with Premier League football clubs. And I say to the noble Lord Moynihan, who I hugely respect, particularly in sporting matters, and I'm loath to even question his motives, but I wonder why he's doing this. Is it not rerunning some of the debates we had a year ago when there was opposition to the bill per se? And that's why I think he's trying to make sure, I'm not suggesting he's acting on behalf of anyone else, he's well capable of speaking for himself, but it seems to me that when he took the Leeds United example, that was personal, but when he began to unpick the layers, almost like an onion, of who controls the club, I can understand why there's questions there. But that seems to be more an issue about Leeds United rather than it is about the bill and this guidance. If we look at the guidance, I can't understand why he thinks it's unclear. If we look at the guidance on 2.7, it talks about significant influence control. For example, absolute decision or veto rights relating to, and there are 8 examples. It's quite clear. I mean, I think we can look too closely at what significant influence or control actually means. I think it's usually quite clear, and those people involved themselves know whether they have that. Noble Lord Moynihan talked about effectively turning people away from football because of the test that they will have to meet. Well, I would suggest if people are not prepared to be open and transparent about what they're doing and perhaps why they're doing it, then there won't be any loss to football because there's more to that than just the financial terms. The last point I wanted to make was he did quote his own football club, which I think I'm right in saying was not a Premier League club at this time last year when the bill was going through. But it seemed to be that the main thrust is about Premier League clubs rather than EFL clubs. And if we're declaring our interests, then I'm a proud part owner and season ticket holder at AFC Wimbledon, further down the pyramid. But he talked about getting rid. He said, I think, I'm quoting him, he said, we didn't think the bill was going to be about, the guidance was about existing owners, it was about new owners hoping to come into the game. Well, I didn't get that impression when we had the discussions a year ago. And look at the supporters of clubs at I think level 2, Reading, Cardiff City, Sheffield Wednesday, who you mentioned, who could not get rid of owners. that they were really dragging those clubs down. It's not just about the Premier League, it's about clubs at a lower level who may have aspirations to get to the Premier League, but there are more, shall we say, mundane examples than the high flyers who hope to be the Arsenals of this world. So I would just say that, again, like my noble friend Lord Hunt said as well, I'm not sure what Lord Moynihan is seeking to achieve other than to undermine the force of the bill itself, the Act itself.
When I saw that we were going to pray against the bill, I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because I know the Lord Moynihan, well, he's good at this, isn't he? And he casts the fly across the water and drags it out to see if it will rise and bite. Well, this trout is biting, but not at the fly, at the line. My lords, you've got a situation here where the bill is going through, and we will have precedent and we will have case law very quickly about how this is operating. We will actually have to let the regulator get on with it. And there was one point I do agree with them on. It's incredibly complicated, the ownership of these national bodies. The Noble Lord Watson's just mentioned it. If you think this complicated, look down the chain. These are institutions, many of which origins go back to the Victorian period. They've been through many, shall we say, evolutions or changes, or indeed some traumatic experiences along the way wrapped around them. There is a great mess about these institutions as you look at them. That's why they get into so much trouble. That's why we need the regulator. You will have to have a series of general terms which will be defined by experience and case law, and by the attitude of the regulators. I hope the current regulator's a success. Let's face it, he hasn't exactly arrived with to universal fanfare. But I hope it's a success, and we set a precedent for how this should be done, because we need that. It is too complicated to get the definitions and clarity the Noble Lord is seeking for here. I know he opposed the regulation of this sport. He's worried about other bits. Happen to disagree with him on this. May agree with him on something else tomorrow. But on this, I disagree with him. We should let the regulator get on with it and observe. We have other things coming in the State of the Game report, and the fact that government cannot look away from this. We've got to make sure it happens independently. I would hope that we just get them and get on with it, because let's face it, we've talked about it enough.
Lords, I apologize. I was going to stand up, but Lord Addington jumped up far too fast. So I apologize that the front bench have started speaking. I think when it comes to football, I want to use the phrase the later Bishop of Southwark, Roy Williamson, applied to me, because we've been working hard to get the Church at Holy Trinity restored in a very poor congregation. Fundraising was really very, very difficult, but we managed to do it. So he came to open this amazing refurbished place. Organ returned to its great glory. The church is full. And he said, your vicars, John Sentamu, can be almost compared to a Yorkshire Terrier. Never letting go, but only doing so in order to get a firmer grip. That's what I see Lord Moynihan as. He's really, when it comes to football, like a Yorkshire Terrier. He does it not of wanting either to control or do anything. He just loves football, and he knows a lot about football. So I just want to pay to him honest attitudes why he's doing this. I don't think he's doing it in order to prevent regulations and all those happening. But because he's like a terrier, I think this is the moment he needs to let go. Just let go, because this stands on a three-legged stool. The first, in terms of what we passed here in this Your Lordship House, there is an act of Parliament. That is really the primary legislation. You've got to go there, and you're going to discover that the Secretary of State has power to do what he's just done. So he's not doing it out of any other reason other than the act we passed gave him that power. Lord Panic said exactly the same thing. Secondly, is the regulator. The regulator has powers, and they were given
to him again by an act of parliament. And I think the third leg is guidance, but I always look at guidance not as the key driver of things. And that's why it cannot be very clearly defined on every occasion because, again, as Lord Panic said, guidance always has got to be understood in terms of context. You just can't simply say what happens to my little club, which is not in paradise, York City Football Club, is climbing up slowly, but still it lost being in Division 2 long time ago. So you can't actually say to the people of York City that Section 1.6 should not apply to them. Regulated football clubs will be required to submit and publish a personal statement identifying all owners. The definition of ownership, including the concept of significant influence or control, will ensure this statement publicly identifies the correct persons as owners, providing transparency to fans and the wider public. That also will apply to my little club of York City Football Club. And therefore, I don't actually see those phrases needing to be more precise. So this legged stool of the Act, of the regulator, the guidance provided by the Secretary of State, I'm sure will make even my little club of York City feel emboldened that they actually know who really is owning and who are these people, and I actually think this is a good thing. So may I beseech my highly admired, really, Lord Moynihan, that this is a time to drop the motion and continue to be so keen on football, but this is not the time, otherwise you're going to play a game that is not going to take you anywhere.
Well, my lords, I, for one, am grateful to my noble friend, Lord Moynihan, for giving us the opportunity to consider these regulations in full and for acting, if I follow the metaphors correctly, like a trout fishing terrier who loves football too much but didn't read the Tory manifesto with enough diligence. But I think we should, of course, had my noble friend not brought this motion, I doubt we would have had quite as many people or quite as many speeches or spent such a long time looking at the regulations that are before your Lordship's House. And I'm glad that we have, because much has changed even since the debates that we had on the bill when before it left your Lordship's House and went to another place. For instance, we saw just yesterday the sanctions that the EFL have handed to Sheffield Wednesday following multiple breaches of their own regulations relating to payment obligations. The EFL have given that club a 6-point deduction and banned its former owner from owning any club in the English Football League for 3 years. Now, had we known that example at the time of the bill, we might have taken it into consideration when discussing the amendments we did on allowing some of the regulation to be delegated to the leagues themselves, but that debate has passed. We're also able to meet this evening after the Commissioner for Public Appointments has appeared before a select committee in another place, where the appointment of the chairman of the independent football regulator was likened to a mafia appointment in Sicily at some point in the 1950s. Well, that was the comments of the chairman of the select committee in another place. But rather more pertinently are the comments not by a politician but by the Commissioner, Sir William Shawcross himself, who has spent the morning giving evidence to a select committee of Parliament and said that he had never seen an appointment with as many breaches of the governance code for public appointments as he has this one. He said that it is not easy to set those breaches aside and called that very disappointing. And I'm sure we would all agree it has been a very disappointing process.
Well, Lord, the Shadow Minister, for giving way. Aren't we somewhat straying from the subject of this motion? We appear to be now discussing the football regulator and some very flowery language used by the Chair of the Commons Public Accounts Committee this morning, which was wholly unfair and wholly unreasonable, when we're actually supposed to be discussing the guidance. Are we not just using a political opportunity to have a go?
This is guidance, and this is a bill which is to be enforced by a new independent regulator. We didn't know the name of the government's preferred candidate for the regulator when the bill went through, regrettably. We do know now who is entrusted with applying this new regime, and we know that the Commissioner for Public Standards has criticised not just the government, but this morning criticised Mr Cogan himself for a lack of transparency. So I don't know whether it is straying from the regulations, but I wonder whether the noble Baroness, the Minister, when she rises, will have anything to say about the comments made by the Commissioner for Public Appointments today. But the noble lady Baroness Debonair is right. The focus for our debate this evening is the regulations that are before us, and on these too, my noble friend Lord Moynihan has raised a number of pertinent questions, some of which we touched on during our scrutiny of the bill, and some of which are raised by the guidance which has now been published. Under particular consideration today is what is an issue we spent considerable time on. When we were looking at the bill in your lordship's scrutiny, we were provided with rather scant information about what significant influence or control would mean in practice. We now have draft guidance, but as my noble friend Lord Moynihan says, that appears to raise rather more questions than it answers. As my noble friend pointed out, during our scrutiny on the bill, there's no requirement in the legislation to consult before publishing the guidance which has now been published. I think that's regrettable, and I see from some of the comments that there has been informal consultation with some in football, but maybe the noble Baroness, the Minister, can set out in a bit more detail the consultation and discussions that were had, which led to the drawing up and publication of this draft guidance. A second and rather more serious point of contention regarding the new owners test, again raised by my noble friend in his speech and his motion today, is the significant departure from the current concepts of ownership employed by the Premier League, the EFL, UEFA and others in football. Now, the noble Lord Panic made some remarks about obscenity, not obscene remarks, I write that carefully, drawing attention to other areas of law, both in this country and in the United States, where different tests are made. But within a football context alone, the Premier League's handbook uses the notion of control and control only, whereas here in the guidance we see the new concept of significant influence or control. So this is introducing some new thoughts into this particular sphere of football regulation. The draft guidance states that the right to exercise significant influence or control over a club may result in that person being considered an owner for the purpose of the Act, regardless of whether or not they actually exercise that right. Surely the combination of this broader interpretation of the meaning of owner and the fact that one doesn't, under the Act, actually have to do anything to be considered as such means that this guidance would capture a far greater number of people than one might initially anticipate. Similarly, as...
Of course the guidance goes further than addressing ownership, and that's because the legislation which Parliament enacted requires attention to significant influence or control. That's the whole point.
The question to the Minister is, from that, will that capture more people than one might imagine? I think the layperson looking at this imagines a single owner of a club, but as in the legislation that Parliament has passed, a number of people can be considered an owner and be considered to have significant influence or control. And I'll come on to a few more examples of that. For instance, at page 7 of the guidance, paragraph 2.11 states that a person might exercise significant influence or control if their recommendations or instructions are always or almost always followed by other owners and or officers due to the financial relationship of the person to the club. What does that mean, for instance, for a club sponsor? They have a clear financial relationship to the club, and they might make recommendations to the club, which are often followed by the officers of the club. Does that mean, under these regulations and the Act that we've passed, that they could be considered to have significant influence or control? Would a sponsor, in any circumstance, count as an owner under these regulations?
I don't like interrupting him because he always gives the fact that he wants to put them. But please, if you look at 1.6, the question you asked, Lord Panic, will it catch everybody? Yes, if they are regulated football clubs. 1.6. Regulated football clubs will be required, so it will catch everybody, to do what 1.6 says.
My point was a broader one about whether under the definitions in the regulation that were in paragraph 2.11, a club sponsor could be considered to have significant influence or control. It seems to me on the reading of the regulations that they might, but I look forward to the Minister's response. It certainly seems that this is quite an expansive list of people that the regulations might apply to. Paragraph 2.12 states that a former owner who sold his or her shares to a close friend could still be considered an owner if he or she makes recommendations on how to vote to the person to whom he or she sold those shares. So under the guidance, a person with no current financial stake in the club whatsoever could actually count as an owner. I'd be grateful for confirmation of that from the Minister. I see her nodding, but we look forward to her confirmation. My noble friend Lord Moynihan set out through the history of Leeds United the complicated arrangements by which football clubs are owned. Another example might be Bournemouth. In 2022, Turquoise Bidco Limited obtained 100% of shares in Bournemouth Football Club. Turquoise was then renamed to Black Knight Football Club UK Limited, which is a UK-based holding company wholly owned by Black Knight Football Club US, based in Nevada. That American entity is in turn owned by Cannae Holdings Incorporated. According to the US Security Exchange Commission, Cannae owned 44.3% of Black Knight, but Cannae is in turn owned by institutional investors, including BlackRock and the Vanguard Group. And an American businessman, Bill Foley, owns 7.7% of Cannae, meaning his beneficial ownership of Bournemouth is 3.4%. But a filing in April this year disclosed that his economic interest in Black Knight is 28%. That example, again, adds to the example of Leeds given by my noble friend Lord Moynihan about the complexity of even the most straightforward football clubs and the difficulty that will be involved here in setting out all of those people that might need to be regulated, investigated and brought before the regulator. I'll conclude by echoing the question that my noble friend asked, as the noble lady, the Minister, will expect me to, given my roots in Tyneside. A question of great interest to my friends and family there will be the one that my noble friend posed, whether she would advise the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to continue to invest in Newcastle United through the Saudi Public Investment Fund, given what this might mean for them and for the club. That is just one of many questions of great interest to football fans, which is not made clear through this guidance, and for the opportunity to probe those in a rather fuller house than I think we would have had in Grand Committee. I'm very grateful to my noble friend for giving us the opportunity.
My lords, my life would be truly boring without the chance to talk about football in your lordship's house. So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to provide clarity. I hope I will provide clarity to your lordship's house on the draft statutory guidance on the meaning of significant influence or control in the context of the Football Governance Act 2025, guidance that was laid before both Houses of Parliament on the 27th of October 2025. I would like to thank the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee for the scrutiny provided on this draft statutory guidance. The committee did not, my lords, draw the guidance to the special attention of the House, and no objections have been raised in the other place. It is always a pleasure to debate issues relating to football regulation with the noble Lord Moynihan. However, I cannot help but share my surprise and regret that the noble Lord felt the need to do this by tabling a fatal motion against the guidance. I have to agree with my noble friend Lord Hunt that this feels a disproportionate approach. I'm also tempted to agree with my noble friend Lord Watson of Invergowrie that he is attempting to rerun the debates we held over a year ago and over the course of the past year. This is not least as I'd sent the draft guidance to the noble Lord myself and offered to meet to discuss the guidance in a letter sent to him and a number of other peers with a known interest over a month ago, an opportunity I also offered to the noble Lord Parkinson. Notwithstanding this, and notwithstanding the fact that noble Lord Moynihan has raised no concerns directly to me or my team before this evening's debate, not when he received my letter, nor even when the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee reported on this guidance on the 13th of November. I'm a little bit confused about the noble Lord's quote from the Minister for Sport. Beyond her written ministerial statement, this hasn't been discussed or had concerns raised about it in the other place. I am grateful for the opportunity to stress how vital this legislation is in delivering for fans, however. My Lords, the implementation of this regime, which prioritises the protection of clubs from unsuitable owners, financial distress and interests of fans nationally, is a priority for this government. That is why, during our lengthy discussions and scrutiny whilst passing the primary legislation, the government committed to producing this guidance before clubs are required to identify their owners in the personnel statement. I don't agree with my noble Lord Parkinson that this guidance doesn't add clarity. The government is pleased to have delivered on this commitment and to provide this clarity regarding the concept of significance, influence or control. I'm sorry the noble Lord Moynihan didn't find it clear. I read it twice and I did think it was clear, and if I understand it as somebody who isn't a regulator, I do believe that it is relatively clear. This guidance plays a key role in the regulator's regime, with the unexpected motion disrupting the progress and preventing David Cogan and his team from getting on with their important job. As my noble friend Baroness Debonair made clear, the regulator now has an excellent, experienced and well-respected chairing post. He has wasted no time meeting clubs and stakeholders from across football, including across the top 5 English leagues, consulting industry on new rules and building up the executive team with regulatory experts. I would hope that noble lords across the House agree the regulator needs to be able to make progress on these priorities without delay. As the noble Lord Adding said, we need to let him get on with his job. As someone who has a terrier, I might not agree with the phrasing of the noble Lord Centenary, but I agree with the sentiment of his interventions. We just need to look at the plight of Sheffield Wednesday to understand the urgency of giving the regulator the tools to get to work. With regards to concerns raised by noble lords today, it is important to note that this guidance has been drafted collaboratively. I'd like to make absolutely clear that officials have worked with both industry and non-industry experts to ensure it is clear, useful and user-friendly. The noble Lord Parkinson asked specifically about consultation. I would like to give the noble Lord assurance that this has been extensive. Officials have spoken to UEFA, test examples with all the competition organisers, a wide range of clubs throughout the different leagues, and with DBT officials about their Comparable Companies Act guidance. In developing the draft, we have drawn on the approach used in the Companies Act Persons with Significant Control regime to ensure we're aligned with current precedent. Building on the Companies Act guidance to introduce industry-specific examples which have been tested with the football industry makes these concepts more tangible for those who will have to interpret the guidance, especially clubs, and ensures this guidance is suited to the regulated industry. In relation, again to the point on the point, in relation to the point again on consultation by the noble Lord Parkinson, crucially the guidance has also been tested with the regulator itself to ensure that the concepts are clear and that the non-exhaustive examples are helpful. David Cogan and his team have confirmed that this guidance provides them with the product they need to undertake their important work. What I'm keen to highlight is the intent of who will be in scope under the guidance. As highlighted previously by noble lords during the report stage of the Football Governance Bill, it is important to understand the breadth of the guidance reach. Our intention is not to create an unhelpfully broad definition. The noble Lord Moynihan suggested I give clarity on specific club ownership. This, my lords, is up to the regulator. This is why we have created the regulator, and we should allow the regulator to do that, not attempt across your lordship's house to come up with our definitions ourselves. We don't want, however, a large portion of a club staff, senior leadership, ordinary minority shareholders or investors to be considered owners, or to unduly burden clubs with identifying and notifying these persons to the IFR. Rather, the intention is to ensure all key persons that can or do act as de facto owners of a football club can be considered as such by the IFR, regardless of their ostensible role, title, shareholding or rights. That is why we're confident that the guidance laid delivers the policy intent to give the regulator the tools to identify relevant individuals, regardless of any opaque ownership models. In practice, this guidance will be most important in cases where there's complex ownership structures, helping the regulator and clubs to identify de facto owners. The regulator must be able to identify owners who can or do shape the key decisions and activities of a club like an owner typically can or does, even if they do not obviously hold control or influence through their share ownership or voting rights. In relation to Lord Moynihan's grounds for concerns and comments about stopping the clock and completeness criteria, the Noble Lord has made many points of detail which are for the IFR to set out in their rules and guidance. They have recently concluded a public consultation on rules and guidance and will publish their response shortly. A number of the questions from the Noble Lord on this point specifically are out of scope of these specific regulations. To summarise, we believe a well-regulated industry with transparent ownership structures and expectations will encourage investment and support the growth of the industry. And above all, the guidance will finally provide transparency for fans as to who actually owns their clubs. I'm going to now turn to a number of points raised during the debate. The Noble Lord Moynihan raised concerns that the guidance might be seen as vague. While I understand that he may believe this guidance is too broad, in our view, it should not be overly prescriptive. Significant influence or control are not binary concepts. The Noble Lord Panic outlined better than I can why an element of judgment might be required. Were the guidance to include numerous exhaustive examples, in our view, it would fetter the regulator's discretion. This is why we provide broad concepts of significant influence or control alongside football-specific examples, mirroring the approach taken in the Companies Act guidance. It would be impossible, my lords, to capture every single scenario, which is why it has been drafted in this way. The Noble Lord Moynihan and others also raised questions about specific clubs and whether current owners of specific clubs will be tested under this guidance. It is not for the government to prejudge the regulator's assessment of who meets the definition of an owner. Simply because an incumbent individual meets the definition, including if they exert significant influence or control, does not mean the regulator is required to test them. It may test an incumbent owner if there's grounds for concern about the suitability, but it would be inappropriate for the government to prejudge this. I'm also not going to give investment advice. I'm not an investment advisor. With respect, I'm not going to venture into who should or shouldn't invest in football clubs, other than to note that people that do quite often end up putting quite a lot of money currently into clubs without an awful lot of return on their investment. So they do it for love. But we are hoping that the independent football regulators regime will stabilise some of the financial uncertainties around this. The Noble Lord Moynihan also asked about growth. My lords, we believe that the Act protects investment. The Football Governance Act will support the growth of the game, especially through ensuring football attracts the right continued investment and has suitable owners and directors. We're confident that the regulatory landscape will attract investors with a more long-term, prudent approach to continue to grow the game as a global success story. Ultimately, a more sustainable game is a more investable game. By adding financial growth to the regulator's secondary duties, it will ensure that the regulator avoids having adverse effects on English football's growth while exercising its duties. And I note that's a point that we debated at some length during the passage of the bill through the House before it became an Act. The Noble Lord Parkinson raised what my noble friend Baroness Debonair described as flowery language used in a committee hearing this morning. My lords, the circumstances around the IFR chair appointment has been discussed at length previously. The Commissioner's evidence today does not change anything regarding the report he published a month ago. We will not be rerunning the progress. I have nothing further to add beyond reiterating that it is clear that David Cogan is the outstanding candidate for this role. And I know he also has the support of noble lords from across your lordship's house. He has a wealth of experience from the sport and media industries, and it's beyond time we let the IFR get on with the job with David Cogan as chair. The plight of clubs, including Sheffield Wednesday, shows why the government was right to establish the regulator,